Let's talk about the season 1 episode SB129, which honestly, after going through so many of these early season 1 episodes, I think this might be one of the most impressive from a production standpoint, as you'll see. But let's talk about the plot just so you guys have context, and then I'll go through all of the Easter eggs and production details and all of that. Now, the main plot of this episode is all about Squidward accidentally traveling through time. He starts off by just trying to get away from SpongeBob and Patrick, and ends up locking himself inside the Krusty Krab freezer, and ends up frozen for like 2,000 years. And to really sell how much time has passed, we get a time card that reads 2,000 years later.
I'll be out of here in no time.
2,000 years later.
Now, I talked about this recently when I covered I Was a Teenage Gary, but this is where that time card gag was introduced. This is a very common gag throughout SpongeBob, these time cards, with the French narrator being like 2 hours later. Back in I Was Teenage Gary, we got just the text on the screen, but it wasn't read aloud. Whereas in this episode, it's the first time where the French narrator actually reads it, which is kind of crazy because if you think about it, that means like one of the most famous SpongeBob gags was barely a part of season 1. And by the way, in case any of you guys didn't know, the French narrator, the one who voices those time cards, is actually voiced by Tom Kenny, the same dude who voices SpongeBob.
The French narrator who has one line.
Now, once Squidward gets defrosted, he slowly realizes that he isn't in the normal Krusty Krab anymore. I mean, everything is futuristic, and everything is chrome for some reason, which is already a nightmare for Squidward. But if we pause when he's still inside the Krusty Krab kitchen, there's actually a calendar right here in the background, and if we look, it says March 6th, 4017. And this actually gives us some really weird SpongeBob lore if we take it too seriously. Think about it. If Squidward traveled 2,000 years into the future, which we know due to that time card, it literally says 2,000 years, and if he ended up in the year 4017, which we know thanks to the calendar, then that would technically mean that the present day season 1 timeline is set in 2017. Technically, canonically, technically, season 1 would take place in 2017. Now, let's be real, I highly doubt the writers sat there and said yes, this is the plan. It was probably just a coincidence of the scene. But like I said, technically this would be canon, right? Moving on though, after Squidward looks outside and sees what Bikini Bottom has become, we're introduced to one of the more underrated background characters from the series, that being Incidental 119. Now, in this episode, he's the future fish responsible for making sure everything stays chrome. That's literally his job here. Now, what's interesting is that according to his early model sheet, which you can see here, he wasn't originally going to be a regular normal incidental character. As we can see here, he was just labeled as Fish Guy. But later on by season 2 and season 3, he became an official incidental, as we can see from his later model sheets, and was updated into Incidental 119. Now, since then, he's become one of those background fish that the production team uses whenever they need a guy with a job. For example, he's cleaned up garbage in the episode Sailor Mouth and thrown out Squidward's painting in Artist Unknown. So after this episode, he got a job as a garbage man. And that's primarily what he does in seasons 2 and 3. But this dude is a jack of all trades. As if we jump forward to the episode 20,000 Patties Under the Sea, we can see that he's a repairman fixing a window at the Krusty Krab. And the dude even became a newspaper photographer in the episode Someone's in the Kitchen with Sandy. So yeah, whenever the production team needs a random fish to work a job in the episode, Incidental 119 is definitely their guy. But yeah, back in SB129, he was just the dude making sure that everything stayed chrome. The dude even spray paints this flower to make sure that everything is chrome. Which, just saying, I really hope the future isn't actually like this. This would be terrible. But also, speaking of that model sheet, it also reveals that this episode had a couple of different titles before SB129 was finalized. As you can see here, at one point it was called SpongeBob 3000, which makes sense since this episode is so focused on the future, but also it kind of doesn't because only half of the episode's focused on the future. As some of you may know, and as you guys will see, the other half of the episode is based in the past. So now that I think about it, SpongeBob 3000 actually wasn't a good episode name. Also, Squidward goes 2,000 years into the future, not 3,000, right? But also, even earlier than that title, if we take a look at the show's 1999 press kit, which was archived online thanks to Comfort Cartoons, which is a really good YouTuber just saying he's a SpongeBob YouTuber as well. He subscribed to me, so shout out to him. But he released a video going through that 1999 press kit, and we can see that this episode was also referred to as the Future Show, which again, I don't know if it fits the episode very well because the episode isn't entirely about the future. In the end though, the production team went with SB129, which is a lot more interesting because it's actually a reference to this episode's production code. Obviously, the SB stands for SpongeBob, right? But this was also the 29th segment produced for season 1, which gives us the 129 part. And we know this for sure because if we take a look at this animation cell from the episode, we can see that it's marked with that 129 production code. But just saying, something kind of confusing about this is that even though SB129 refers to its production order, it was actually the 26th episode to air, which I've explained a million times to make it simple for you guys. Pretty much like when the production team was making the episodes, they made them in a specific order, but when they were given to Nickelodeon, Nickelodeon aired all of them out of order. So even though this was the 29th episode made, it was the 26th episode released. But let's keep it rolling, all right? Once Squidward is fully trapped in the future, we meet SpongeTron and Patron, the futuristic counterparts of SpongeBob and Patrick. And the art team clearly had fun with these guys because their designs are way more detailed than you'd expect for characters who only appear in one episode, with both of them even having like model sheets made despite only appearing in the episode for maybe 2 minutes. Now sadly, both of these characters were basically one-offs, but Patron in particular has technically been referenced since in the Patrick Star Show. For example, in the episodes Fun and Done and TV or Not TV, Patrick's body transforms into something that looks like pretty much identical to Patron, including the two heads. Like here's a side-by-side, and I mean this is clearly a reference to Patron. So yeah, though the character never shows up again, he has been referenced since. I cannot say the same for SpongeTron though. He's just erased from history. Now, as the reality of the future hits Squidward, we get one of the most memorable scenes from this entire episode, if you ask me. That's Squidward lying on the floor, rocking back and forth, and completely losing his mind, just going, "Future." I mean, I can't really blame Squidward. I would be freaking out as well. And I mean, if anyone missed it too, in the future, SpongeTron has clones. So in the future, Squidward would have to deal with multiple SpongeBobs. He already cannot stand one SpongeBob. So this truly is like a nightmare for our boy Squidward. Fortunately for us though, a lot of early artwork from the scene has surfaced over the years, thanks to the SpongeBob Wiki. I always want to give them credit because they're a really good resource for all of this stuff. But yeah, it's really cool to compare the rough versions to the final cut. And there are tons of notes from the storyboard team showing just how much thought was put into this one really quick gag from the episode, as well as this other storyboard image with notes specifying that the animators should lift Squidward's hands and feet. And that's not it. There are actually a lot of early sketches and storyboards for this episode that have leaked over the years. So let's talk about some more. As the scene progresses, Squidward makes it clear that he wants to get the frick out of here and fast, especially after the dude gets peeled open by a fucking can opener.
Oops. Oh, yeah, that one's the can opener. Try the one on the right.
Yeah, I'd want to get out of there too, so he has SpongeBob point him in the direction of their time machine. Well, I was actually shocked to find that the art team went out of their way to even make a model sheet for the peeled open version of Squidward. They even made ones for the frozen version of him before he was eventually defrosted by SpongeTron, and one for the laser SpongeTron uses to do the actual defrosting. Which, I mean, come on, this is a very impressive level of detail for scenes that only last like a couple of seconds. For those of you who don't know, SpongeBob actually would have all of the final animation done overseas using the company Rough Draft Korea. So it actually makes sense that they would be so strict about the consistency of each model and them making model sheets for like every single design. Just because if Rough Draft Korea doesn't get it right the first time, it is going to be very expensive for them to go back and change things. So it actually makes sense why they made so many model sheets. And as you'll see, they made a ton for this episode, but we'll get there. For now, let's get back to the plot. As once SpongeTron lets Squidward know about that time machine, he dips the frick out of there and heads to the past. And what follows is a really quick but cool scene showing Squidward travel through time, before he ends up in a prehistoric version of Bikini Bottom.
That's sort of an old world charm. I guess this is before manners were invented.
Yeah, Squidward is just as freaked out by this place as he was from the future, but he's stuck here now, and eventually runs into primitive versions of both SpongeBob and Patrick, who freak him out even more, especially Patrick, which I can't really blame Squidward. I mean, we get a close-up hand-painted shot of his face, and this dude is looking pretty rough. But a fun fact about this close-up shot is that it was later reused in the video game Lights, Camera, and Pants, after SpongeBob says that he better get Patar some heated food.
I better find this guy something to cook with fast. There's no telling what he'll pop in his mouth next.
This is kind of a cool Easter egg, but I actually bring it up because it technically is like a mistake since they used the wrong prehistoric Patrick. Believe it or not, there are actually two versions of this primitive Patrick. The one from this episode, which from the character's model sheet, which I'm showing here, we can see that the art team refers to him and SpongeBob as prehistoric SpongeBob and prehistoric Patrick. But the one in the actual game where the Easter egg takes place is actually Patar, an entirely different prehistoric version of Patrick from the episode So yeah, they made a little bit of a mistake here. It's an Easter egg, but it's also a mistake. Moving on though, Squidward does his best to get along with prehistoric Patrick and SpongeBob, and eventually teaches them a thing or two when he realizes how dumb they are. I don't even mean that in a rude way, but they're like cavemen. They're not very smart. And to really highlight how brainless these two are, there's a close-up shot of them drooling and struggling to pay attention while Squidward lectures them. And this shot was actually a really important one in terms of SpongeBob production history, because it was the team experimenting with digital ink and paint animation. Now, to explain this for dummies like me who maybe don't understand 2D animation, early SpongeBob was normally made using a more traditional hand-drawn animation process. The drawings would be done on paper, painted, and then put together with backgrounds. Whereas digital ink and paint means that instead of finishing and coloring everything physically, the artwork could be scanned onto a computer, colored digitally, and yeah, it's just like a completely different process that was going to eventually become the norm for 2D animation. So this one scene was actually a pretty big deal. We just did not notice it at all at the time as kids. Also though, that prehistoric section of this episode also has a bunch of great production art behind it. For example, there's an early sketch of prehistoric SpongeBob that's honestly really cute, plus several drawings showing Squidward trying to teach both of them how to catch a jellyfish, which is actually cool. We can line this up with the final cut of the episode and see the finished product. But one of the coolest pieces is an individual cell showing a foreground layer used for the prehistoric Bikini Bottom background, which I mean, just look at this. Like, they're not trees. I guess this is a tree. This is all like undersea stuff, but like, look how detailed and cool this looks. I personally love stuff like this because it shows how layered the backgrounds actually were. Like, this wasn't just one drawing, guys. Like, SpongeBob and Patrick were drawn separately, the foreground elements were drawn separately, and then the background was painted separately. And all of these layers work together to create this sense of depth. It's the type of shit that makes 2D animation so impressive. Honestly though, I'd say the most impressive production material from this episode comes from the time machine sequence. Well, the final one after the prehistoric part of the episode. As after Squidward leaves the past, his machine breaks and he gets thrown into this endless void of nothingness.
He's not here. No more SpongeBob. No more.
The animators went all out for this part, and we know this due to all of this different production material that's been released. For example, there's this starry animated background that they used. There's also this swirling animation that got layered over top of it. And of course, both elements have their own model sheets. And I bring this all up just because most of these early SpongeBob episodes are usually set in a pretty grounded location. For example, the Krusty Krab, SpongeBob's house, or Jellyfish Fields. But here, the show is dealing with all sorts of different locations and had to make so much new art just for this one episode. So let's give them a round of applause. I know I'm just glazing and sucking off the production team, but like, seriously, if you dug as deep as I did when making this video, they went all out with this episode. But yeah, that empty void eventually leads to one of the episode's most iconic moments, where Squidward realizes that he's alone and eventually says the word alone out loud, which is followed by a bunch of these speech bubbles appearing while different voices repeat alone back at him. It's actually pretty creepy, especially for SpongeBob at the time.
Alone.
Hello. Alone. Hello. Alone. Alone. Alone.
Believe believe it or not, they even made a model sheet for this sequence, for like the speech bubbles. And like, look at all of the notes on this thing, dude. I gotta say, after covering most of season 1, I really do think this might be one of the most technically ambitious episodes from this early era of SpongeBob. In a lot of other episodes, I feel like they were able to reuse assets, right? Like Conch Street was already made and they probably already had backgrounds for it. Same with the Krusty Krab, but so many new assets were made for this episode. But while we're on the topic, speaking of that alone scene, the speech bubble itself would actually be later reused during the episode Hats Off to Space. And yeah, it's a sneaky little Easter egg that most people would miss. To be honest with you, I watched this episode back when it like premiered and I didn't even catch the Easter egg, but it is pretty freaking cool, right? And that's not it. Modern SpongeBob has referenced this episode a couple of times actually. For example, it got referenced in Friendiversary, where frames of the episode appear when SpongeBob is remembering Squidward. If you've been watching my season 1 videos, I've brought this one up many times because numerous season 1 episodes are referenced in that book. But there's another callback as well in season 14, as there's the episode PL 1413. And this episode follows Plankton getting sent 2,000 years into the future after he gets trapped in a time capsule with a Krabby Patty. This is very clearly a sequel episode that references like the original SB129. Just instead of Squidward being frozen in the Krusty Krab freezer, we have Plankton preserved inside of a time capsule. Now, some people would probably call this nostalgia bait, which I notice is something that a lot of modern SpongeBob fans like you guys do not like this at all. And I do get it. There are times where SpongeBob, you know, instead of writing a really good episode, they'll lean on nostalgia a little bit too much. But I personally love this shit, and it's probably because I'm a millennial, right? Like, you guys have to understand, when modern SpongeBob calls back to older episodes, to people like me, it's really cool because they're referencing the old SpongeBob that we all used to watch. So is it cheap? Yes. But is it also like really cool? Yeah. Like, I don't see why this would be a problem. You know what I mean? It's really cool. And I mean, it just shows how iconic the episode is. Like, even 20 years later, Nickelodeon still knows how important this episode is, and they're gonna milk it as much as they can. But yeah, that's it for SB129. Hopefully you guys enjoyed this deep dive into this episode. I don't think I missed anything. If I did, let me know in the comments, but I think I did a pretty comprehensive deep dive into this episode, right? So let's head into another one. By the way, if you're new to the channel, I'm one of the only like non-AI SpongeBob Sleep channels. Like, I use no AI in my content. So if you wanna, you know, support somebody who makes this content from their heart and puts a lot of love into it, hit that subscribe button, please. Or hype the video, guys. Hyping is like a really big deal. If you're on your phone, go to the comment section and swipe left and you'll have an option to hype the video. This will like literally help me so much, so please do it. Dude, this SpongeBob episode has so many Easter eggs in it. In the season 16 episode, Squidward's Tough Break, this is a fairly new one, by the way. Squidward Tentacles finally gets a day off of work and his boring job at the Krusty Krab and plans a fancy brunch at a high-class bistro. Or is it bistro? I don't know, let me know in the comments. All I know is that those places usually have bagels and coffee, and that stuff is really yummy. But yeah, Squidward, dressed to impress, heads to what he believes is this cafe, only to end up at a very rare and infamous location, the Salty Spittoon. And dude, this is where we can find a ton of Easter eggs. Fans will recognize this place as the same like dive bar first introduced all the way back in season 3's No Weenies Allowed, where only the toughest fish dare to enter.
I had a bowl of nails for breakfast this morning.
Yes, so?
Without any milk.
Right this way. Sorry to keep you waiting.
In that classic episode, SpongeBob famously struggled to prove his toughness at the door. And I'll be honest, we've actually seen the Salty Spittoon plenty of times since No Weenies Allowed. Nonetheless, in this episode, the writers were smart. They put Squidward in the Salty Spittoon. He runs into Reg, this guy right here, the very same doorman from No Weenies Allowed, who literally chucks him through the doors of the bar. Well, from this point onward, this episode gives us a shit ton of nostalgia, with there being a bunch of Easter eggs and familiar faces. For example, one of the very first is a deep cut character. This guy right here, Harry the Health Hazard. He's like a wrestler who hasn't appeared in quite a few years at this point. This dude first showed up in the season 12 episode Patrick's Tantrum, and he's back here in Squidward's Tough Break, seen among the Salty Spittoon's patrons. This sets up for a quick gag where Reg promptly punches Harry right in the stomach. Ouch. That looks like that would really hurt. I don't think I personally want to mess with Reg. The Easter eggs and references continue continue inside the bar, as the episode literally becomes like a who's who of all of SpongeBob's different like tough background characters. I mean, the show's team clearly had a blast populating this episode and the Salty Spittoon with obscure tough guys from across the SpongeBob universe. There's a ton of them here. Another example is this dude right here, a fish that fans like to refer to as the huge guy, a giant muscular purple fish that you'll remember from the iconic episode The Fry Cook Games. Back in that season 2 episode, the huge guy carries Patrick out on his back.
Bow down before the awesome might of this huge guy who's carrying the real contestant, Patrick Star!
Years later, in this very random incidental character, the huge guy appears in the Salty Spittoon on the wall of the toughest guys. And there's still more. This entire Salty Spittoon section of the episode is like overflowing with different Easter eggs, and this was likely by design. It seems the writers in recent seasons have been eager to revisit it. Like, it's clear that Nickelodeon has made an effort to make the Salty Spittoon like somewhat of a reoccurring location within SpongeBob lore now. In fact, the Spittoon has reappeared a few times since season 13. So yeah, the location is back full swing in the show. And to fill out the bar's background, the art team seems to have dug deep into the character archives, and the result is a ton of rare character cameos during the Salty Spittoon sequences in Squidward's Tough Break. For instance, a tough ladyfish named Mo appears, a really cool Easter egg because Mo actually originally came from the Camp Coral spin-off series. Like, Mo isn't a regular SpongeBob character. They were brought into the main SpongeBob series during Salty Sponge, and later in this episode, Squidward's Tough Break, as we can see them right here. Another example is the HR Thug, who originally appeared back in the episode Selling Out, where he threatened Squidward. The art team needed to fill up the Salty Spittoon and looked for any random thug or criminal-like character they could find, and trust me, this is a good example. The HR Thug is very random, and he appears right here in Squidward's Tough Break. But we can also spot this character right here, the biker fish, originally designed for the episode Potato Puff. Like I said, the art team had to dig deep, so they pulled this character from Potato Puff, and they're now a regular part of the Salty Spittoon crowd. But there's plenty of classic tough guys that originated back in No Weenies Allowed that also make a comeback in this episode. For example, my boy Tattoo Terry. This guy, for some reason, just looking at him is so nostalgic to me. Here's a side-by-side of him in this new episode and him back in No Weenies Allowed. There's also this guy, the Hate Fish, and even this dude, the Popeye Fish. Another very familiar fish if you're an old school SpongeBob fan like me that watched No Weenies Allowed back in the day. Now, to be fair, some of these characters have occasionally reappeared in other episodes over the years since No Weenies Allowed, but seeing them all assembled together back inside the Salty Spittoon, the very place that originally defined them and created them, is really cool. There are a ton that I didn't mention, so if there's any fellow SpongeBob nerds like me, let me know in the comments all of the other reappearances in the Salty Spittoon of characters who have appeared in the past that I missed. As the plot continues though, Squidward starts fitting right in with the Spittoon crew, eventually earning the respect of Reg and the gang, thus turning himself into a new tough guy persona known as Crazy Legs. This leads to a subtle Easter egg during a scene at the Krusty Krab, where Squidward shows up to loiter and mess with the normies, as he puts it. Squidward demonstrates just how evil he's become by doing something truly terrible, guys.
Mind if I double dip? No, 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 no!
I know, right? Put this dude in jail. Freaking lock him up. Incidental 1D is absolutely disgusted by this, but here he is in this episode making a very familiar face. And if this disgusted face seems familiar, it's because it absolutely is. It's almost identical to a classic reaction from the episode Something Smells. And that season 2 favorite, SpongeBob's rancid and nasty breath from his infamous peanut onion ketchup sundae. Like, this dude literally eats a sundae with ketchup in it. That's, oh my gosh.
Ketchup! Onions! Good thing I still have these peanut plants growing in the windowsill. A little texture never hurt.
This makes his breath so bad that SpongeBob makes this dude in the movie theater, Incidental 1D, recoil in just disgust from the smell.
I hope my horrible ugliness won't be a distraction to you.
Not at all, boy!
The Squidward's Tough Break R team faithfully recreated Incidental 1D's meme-worthy face, giving us a direct reference to that Something Smells gag, which is very nostalgic, at least for me. That's it for this episode though, but let's head into another episode, like I always say, with more Easter eggs. And real quick guys, I'm gonna say it really quick to all my regular viewers. I know you guys are probably sick and tired of hearing me say this, but to anybody who's new, please subscribe guys. I put a lot of love and time into these videos, like so much passion goes into these to make sure they're accurate, and I use no AI. I'm one of the only like SpongeBob sleep channels on YouTube that doesn't use AI. So if you're enjoying this content and you want content from a real person who loves SpongeBob, probably way more than he should, click subscribe. I'll really appreciate it. And I'll owe you like a whole slice of pizza, okay? Deal. Let's talk about the episode Squidina's Little Helper next. And this is actually an episode from the Patrick Star Show, the SpongeBob spin-off. It's not from regular SpongeBob, but trust me, okay? Trust Cartoon Corey. I dug deep and found a ton of really cool references, gags, and trivia about this episode. So let's dive into it. This episode focuses on Squidina Star, and she's actually the producer of her and Patrick's show, but it focuses on her overworking herself and deciding to hire an intern. Well, right from the opening scene, the episode has a little bit of an Easter egg that's more of, I guess, like a meta reference that ties into the SpongeBob universe. Squidina wakes up in her bed, slaps her alarm clock, and suddenly springs to life. Now, in this quick shot of her bedroom, you may notice this poster right here on her wall, and it's actually like identical to the real life promotional poster for the Patrick Star Show, at least back in season 1, and is very similar to that actual marketing material for this spinoff. Like I said, this one isn't entirely an Easter egg, but it's a very meta reference because they're like literally acknowledging it within the show. But yeah, I just thought I'd mention it. Moving on though, immediately after hopping out of bed, Squidina enthusiastically says the following line. Now, if that phrasing gave you some deja vu, it's because the first part, I'm ready, is of course a direct nod to SpongeBob's own iconic catchphrase. As a lot of you probably already know, SpongeBob first shouted this catchphrase all the way back in the show's pilot, I believe, Help Wanted, and Squidina's helper is making a little bit of a reference here to that catchphrase. After this, Squidina leaps into action, setting up like an elaborate contraption to ensure Patrick wakes up and actually gets ready for the day's broadcast on time. As you can imagine, Patrick is probably the type of dude to oversleep, you know what I mean? Well, this whole sequence is one big visual gag, as Squidina rigs the house with various props and even lays out clothes for Patrick to tumble into. But here's the thing, there's one element of her setup that involves jellyfish jelly, where we see Squidina grab a jar of this jelly and she uses it to paint a path for Patrick. Well, it seems that this jar could be an Easter egg, as the label on Squidina's jar is very similar to the jellyfish jelly jar seen back in the episode Jellyfish Hunter, where it features a transparent jar, which I will admit the jars are kind of different and the labels are somewhat different, but they both feature like an orange splat and the word jelly in the exact same purple text, using the same font. So yeah, the one we're seeing right here in the Patrick Star Show looks just like the homemade jellyfish jelly that SpongeBob harvested and brought to the Krusty Krab years before in the season 2 episode Jellyfish Hunter.
Hey buddy, what the heck is that?
Why, this is a hole, good sir.
Not that. That!
It's just a little old Krabby Patty smothered in jellyfish jelly.
Amazing.
It was so delicious that Fred, our boy Fred, literally breaks into a song after trying it. So I personally would like to try it, but I don't know. Would you guys eat jellyfish jelly? Let me know in the comments. But it is clearly somewhat of a reference here, though I will admit this one could be a coincidence. What is undeniable though is the font, like the text itself, is identical. Moving on though, as the episode's plot kicks in, Squidina reveals that despite her very happy mood all the time, she's feeling pretty burnt out from single-handedly producing the Patrick Show every day, so she desires to hire an intern to help her out. This leads to this tiny little character right here getting the job. So Squidina gives him a backstage tour of her high-tech production setup, and this leads to another really funny Easter egg or reference. Squidina shows her new intern a special control lever and says with a grin that this is the slapstick lever before pulling it.
This one, for example, tosses the chainsaws to Patrick. And this one moves it to his next mark.
As you just seen, specifically, the robot hand pokes at Patrick's eyes and delivers rapid-fire physical comedy in a way that is very clearly referencing Moe, Larry, and Curly, and things that they would do to each other back in The Three Stooges, a black and white but classic comedy show from back in the day. I also love that, by the way, after this automated smackdown, Squidina casually says the following line.
That's our slapstick lever. We try not to overuse that one.
Now, right after that slapstick lever demonstration, Squidina realizes that the live studio audience for the Patrick show is getting restless due to some dead air, so the show cuts to the audience. And here, animators snuck in another really cool Easter egg, this one I personally love. As front and center, we see Lady Upturn, the posh, snooty fish who has become like quite the reoccurring character in modern SpongeBob episodes. As some of you may already know, Lady Upturn is known for being wealthy and easily bored. She first appeared all the way back in season 10 during the Krusty Catering episode as a yuppie party host, and she's appeared many times since, even in Camp Coral. In Squidina's little helper, she's sitting in the crowd looking very disinterested. And if we zoom in on her hands, we can see that she's holding a very specific magazine, specifically a Fancy Living Digest magazine. And this is sick. This is actually a callback to the season 3 episode Chocolate with Nuts, a banger of an episode, very nostalgic. In that episode, SpongeBob and Patrick stumble upon Squidward's copy of Fancy Living Digest in the mail, a magazine showcasing the extravagant lifestyles of rich fish.
Hey, Squidward, how do the people in that magazine get all that money?
They're entrepreneurs. They sell things to people.
What kind of things?
How should I know? Things people want to buy. Now keep your paws off my mail.
This inspires the duo to start selling chocolate bars. This is the entire reason that they go door to door trying to sell the chocolate bars, becoming salesmen themselves. This magazine hasn't really been seen much since its original appearance, but it has popped up a few times in the background of episodes. For example, you can see it right here in the episode Chum Bucket Supreme, and in this shot of the episode Missing Identity. But this was its first appearance in the Patrick Star Show. And I don't know, personally, I really like when the spin-offs reference the actual show. It shows that everything is like connected, as when all of these spin-offs first started coming out, they felt like they were in different universes sometimes. So as I've said a million times in the past, it's cool when SpongeBob, like the regular show, acknowledges the spin-offs, and it's cool when the spin-offs acknowledge things that are normally seen in the regular show. Also, one other thing I want to ramble on about before we get into another Easter egg is that this appearance here is like very well written, because if you think about different SpongeBob characters, right? Like Lady Upturn is the type of character who would be reading such a magazine, so good continuity from the writers. Sometimes people will accuse the SpongeBob team of just using Easter eggs as nostalgia bait, right? And that it's not always done correctly, but this is an example of it being done very naturally and being done in a way that actually fits the plot and the characters being used. But let's take a break from the Easter eggs and dive into some facts and trivia about this episode, more about the behind the scenes production of the episode, as there's a ton of content online that offers fans like us a peek behind the curtain at how these types of episodes come together. 2D animation is very complicated. But yeah, some storyboard images for this episode were shared online by the SpongeBob production crew. So let's deep dive into those. Comparing the storyboards to the final scenes gives us cool insight into the creative process and how all of this stuff comes together. For example, one set of storyboard panels shows the sequence where Squidina's new intern hops on an oversized glue bottle to squirt glue on the wall, but ends up covering Patrick with glue instead. In the storyboard sketch, we can see a rough version of this scene. I'm showing them side by side, and yeah, it's just cool. It highlights just how far the team goes to turn what we see in storyboard images into like a fully colored shot. Additionally, one of the show's background painters, Brad Sutton, shared some background art from this episode. Notably, he posted the key background painting of Patrick's stage workroom, essentially the backstage area where Patrick and Squidina run the show. So let's take a look at this art side by side with the actual episode, as this is just another really cool thing to see. In Sutton's artwork, which is most likely used as a reference image whenever animators are animating the actual room, we can see all of the furniture and just different elements that ended up being used in the fully animated scene. Like I said, this isn't necessarily Easter eggs, but I want to start incorporating sections like these these or like this into these types of videos, just because, you know, it's good to highlight the other staff members, but I don't think all of the people responsible for the show, all of the tons of people who contribute to the animation and storyboards and all that stuff, I don't think that they get recognized enough. And there is so many behind the scenes images and storyboards released by them online, so we might as well talk about them and compare them to the final product. Another thing I want to start talking about in these videos are deleted scenes and cut content. Interestingly, some of the gags in Squidina's Little Helper were deemed a bit too much for younger viewers overseas. Not in America, but in the UK and in Ireland. In those regions, broadcasts of this episode made a number of content edits and cuts for safety and sensitivity reasons. For example, early in the episode, there's a moment where Squidina says that she's burning the candle at both ends. When she says this, Patrick, ever literal, is shown with an actual candle burning from both ends stuck through his head. He even pulls it through his head like it's no big deal at one point. It's a quick, cartoony visual gag. However, the UK version of this episode completely cuts this shot, most likely out of concern that children might try to imitate it. Another example early on in the episode is when Squidina is frantically getting Patrick ready. At one point, she uses a giant razor to shave his stubby face in a very cartoonish way, but I mean, if you actually look at Patrick's face in slow motion, he does get cut up. Nonetheless, this gag in the UK version is cut down drastically. Also, the slapstick lever demonstration scene that we already talked about, remember that scene? There's a part of it where Patrick nearly gets his eyes poked out, and this part of the gag was cut from UK broadcasts as well. It's kind of weird because, I mean, like, if we go back in time, earlier episodes like The Splinter had some very grotesque and like graphic scenes, and it aired in the UK seemingly uncut. So it's weird that later in the future, in season 16, gags like this are getting cut in the UK, but hey, don't ask me, go and ask Nickelodeon. For now though, let's get back to what you guys actually want, and that's Easter eggs in another episode. Okay, so we've covered this episode before, but I found more stuff that I haven't talked about before. So yeah, let's dive back into the episode Karate Pals. The episode kicks off with the Gal Pals hanging out, with them each showing all of their different skills. Sandy shows karate, Pearl shows cheerleading, Karen cooks some holographic meatloaf, as we covered previously when we talked about this episode. And they're all having a good old time. You know, sometimes you just have to get the girlies together, it's just a vibe. But what's also a vibe is the really cool Easter egg at the very start of this episode. This Easter egg happens right as Sandy offers karate, and Karen pretty much rejects it, with her claiming that she's not built for combat.
My servos are not built for combat.
It's very, very easy to miss. And to be honest with you, this isn't the type of thing that you'd catch unless you were actually looking for Easter eggs. But if we look at Karen's screen during this scene, a schematic pops up on it. And if you zoom in, this labels her as Karen 1.0, which is a nerdy little acknowledgement that the show has literally done a next model storyline for Karen before. It's a reference to the episode Karen 2.0, where Plankton swaps the original Karen out for a replacement model. Karen leaves, winds up at the Krusty Krab, and the story eventually forces Plankton to face what he threw away. So yeah, a really cool Easter egg here that acknowledges Karen 2.0. Like, it's acknowledging that there is another version of Karen, and that this one right here, the one that's a part of the Gal Pals and is still cooking holographic meatloaf, this one is the original model. It's not that big of a deal, but it is some cool continuity. Also, you guys have been on my ass about how I pronounce continuity, so let me get it right one sec. So I've been saying continuity, but it's continuity. Continuity, there we go. I'll probably continue to say it wrong sometimes. Maybe I'll get a t-shirt with that on it. Continuity, there we go, now I got it. But yeah, this whole thing with Karen 1.0 referencing Karen 2.0 is some good continuity. Did I get it right, guys? If so, I better get a freaking cookie or a Krabby Patty, bro. I feel like one of those would slap. What would also slap though is another freaking Easter egg, so let's talk about it. The next Easter egg or reference can be found once Sandy convinces everybody to commit to her karate lessons. As once they get into it, Sandy teaches karate wearing the same basic gi design from the episode Single Cell Defense. Back in that episode, Sandy trains Plankton after he gets sick of being stepped on, and during her training with Plankton, she wears a gi with a purple belt.
Your opponent's momentum can be used against them. no matter your size.
Well, years later in Karate Pals, not only does she wear the same outfit, but she's now depicted with a black belt instead. If we do a side-by-side, we can see there's some slight differences, but it's pretty much the same outfit. And yeah, now she's a black belt instead of a purple belt. So this is not only a good Easter egg, but it's also some really cool continuity. Belt systems vary by dojo, but common karate belt progressions usually place purple before black, with a black belt being like one of the top ranks. This is why it's really good continuity, as I guess Sandy has risen through the ranks since single cell defense, going from a purple belt to a black belt. So yeah, don't mess with Sandy, bro, she'll kick your butt. I'm gonna move on to another Easter egg or reference, but I do wonder if this is going to continue. Like in future episodes, if Sandy dresses up in like a gi or a karate uniform, is she gonna have a black belt again? If so, that's really good stuff. I mean, this girl's been practicing karate since like season 1, so she might as well be a black belt by now. Now from here, Sandy's love of karate spreads on to all of the other gal pals, but they take it way too seriously. Karen in particular becomes obsessed with karate after the lesson, which actually helps Plankton at one point in the following scene, as when Karen arrives back home, she walks in on Plankton being chased inside the chum bucket in his lab by this nasty looking chum monster right here. Well, this is actually a reference, as the chum monster chasing Plankton looks like the same one from season 13's Chums. If we rewind back to that episode, we were introduced to the collective hive under Master, shortened to Chum. These monsters are a group of chum who were formed by mixing gas in the sewers. They were accidentally created by Plankton and they look really gross.
Chum mixes with gases in sewer to form we.
Well, in Karate Pals, I guess Plankton made another one because he's getting chased by it in this scene right here. He even requests Karen to put it back in its cage at one point, so maybe Plankton's been training them, who knows. But if we look at the one in this episode, Karate Pals, and the one from Chums side by side, we can see that it's like the same monster, so really good stuff by the writing team. Some really good continuity. I've got another Easter egg that I want to talk about in a second that's a really good one, but real quick, and don't worry to my regulars, I'm going to shut up fast. If you're new, guys, please subscribe. I'm one of the only non-AI SpongeBob channels on YouTube. Well, one of the only non-AI SpongeBob sleep channels. There's tons of SpongeBob channels that don't use AI on YouTube. But yeah, if you want to support somebody who uses absolutely no AI and puts way too much time into making videos about SpongeBob, please subscribe. But I'm gonna shut up now and let's talk about more Easter eggs. Now, after that quick scene at the chum bucket, the episode jumps to Sandy's tree dome, where Plankton calls requesting for Sandy's help as Karen starts going crazy and just redecorating Plankton's lab by punching and kicking holes throughout the entire place. Now, it's a really quick scene, but when it jumps to Sandy's tree dome and Sandy answers the phone, there's a very easy to miss Easter egg. Just as Sandy answers the phone, we can see a couple of ducks. And these are actually the same exact ones from the episode Salty Sponge. Back in Salty Sponge, there was a quick gag near the ending of the episode where a group of ducks tried to cross the road before they're almost run over by one of the biker fish, who quickly zips past. Well, I guess Sandy saved them, and maybe even adopted them, as the exact same ducks appear in Sandy's tree dome during that scene in Karate Pals. I may be missing some lore detail here. There might have been an episode where Sandy adopts them or something, or maybe there was a scene in Salty Sponge that I missed. But yeah, they're with Sandy now. And also, a nice little touch that I noticed, we can see that when they're trying to cross the road, they're wearing air helmets. I'm zooming in, you can see them right here. But in Karate Pals, because they're inside Sandy's tree dome, they don't need them, so just really cute. Them wearing air helmets isn't an Easter egg, but it's just a really cute touch. From here, Sandy heads over to the chum bucket to see what the heck is going on with Karen, who's doing some remodeling, punching holes throughout the place, as I mentioned. But this makes Sandy realize that maybe it isn't just Karen. Maybe Pearl and Mrs. Puff are also tweaking out as well, so she rushes over to Pearl, who's at one of her cheer meetings. Well, Sandy was right, and Pearl's just been beating the heck out of all of her different classmates and just other people on her cheer team. And in one scene, as Sandy runs towards Pearl, she sees a group of her classmates and members of the band team running away from Pearl. During the shot, a tuba is thrown out of nowhere and eventually hits somebody in the distance, this guy right here. This is a very quick scene, but if we pause just as the tuba is thrown, we can see a very rare character. This guy right here is Coach Cod. And yeah, unfortunately, he gets cooked by the tuba that was just yeeted at him. Dude, it literally causes an explosion, so I hope he's okay. Somebody needs to put Pearl in jail for this. She could have killed that guy. But yeah, this character is a major deep cut. He first appeared in a flashback scene in the episode Sing a Song of Patrick 15 years ago.
Roses are blue, violets are red. I have to go to the bathroom.
How many times I gotta tell you, this is gym class?
But then after that episode, the dude just completely disappeared for 11 straight seasons. But this changed in season 16, when he randomly got like 2 new random appearances. First in the episode Pigskin Pearl, in a quick scene where he talks to Pearl inside of a locker room. And then in this episode, Karate Pals. And here's a fun fact for you guys. It turns out that Karate Pals and Sing a Song of Patrick were both written by Luke Brookshire. So who knows, maybe this character may have been created by Luke himself, which is why the character has only really shown up when Luke is doing the writing. That's just a theory though, I don't know for sure. But nonetheless, it was cool to see the dude back. From here, after Pearl pretty much nearly murdered somebody, Sandy decides that she needs to undo the karate training. So her and SpongeBob try to fix the mess with a reverse karate matrix device, meant to erase the karate obsession. But they mess up and end up spreading the karate obsession across the whole town instead. And this is where we can find another reference. And honestly, this is another one that's very easy to miss unless you're paying attention to like the background, as SpongeBob and Sandy go into town to see if things have worked. And this is where they realize that they messed up, as we can see a variety of different Bikini Bottomites and just background characters doing karate. But if we look on top of this building right here, we can see Incidental 64 and another Incidental having quite the fight. And if we look at Incidental 64, they're wearing dark glasses and a trench coat, and they're dodging punches in slow motion. And I mean, if you were born before the year of like 2005, you already know what this reference is. This is a reference to the iconic film The Matrix. And if you look at Incidental 64, he's even doing like the iconic bullet time like dodge where he leans backwards. I'm showing a side-by-side with The Matrix here as well. And yeah, it's very easy to miss, but it's an awesome reference to a really good movie, just saying. But yeah, this is a very messy situation. We've seen what Pearl was capable of with her obsession of karate, so who knows what all these other Bikini Bottomites are going to do. SpongeBob and Sandy have really messed up, but did they actually though? As Sandy stresses out, SpongeBob points out that while this wasn't the ideal plan, everyone is actually having fun. The episode then cuts to quick jump cuts of different incidentals and background characters practicing karate together and having honestly a great time. Now, during one of these shots, we can spot another rare character. But let me give you some context. If we rewind all the way back to the episode The Chaperone, and that episode, it's prom night. And though Pearl is forced to go to prom with SpongeBob since nobody else asked her, she truly wanted to go with somebody else, if you guys remember.
There's only one fish in the sea as long, tan, and handsome as he is, and that's him!
This introduced us to Octavius Rex, the popular kid at Pearl's school. Pearl mentions Octavius Rex as long, tan, and handsome, and then later he appears at the prom, alone, and eventually asks Pearl to dance, but she realizes he's lame and refuses. Now, Octavius Rex is a very rare character. He's appeared since The Chaperone, but usually with a different color scheme. But what's really cool about this appearance is that he's actually the right color. If we do a side-by-side with him in this episode, Karate Pals, and then his original appearance in The Chaperone, they finally used the correct color. So we can say for sure that this dude right here is Octavius Rex. And it's an awesome reference to one of my favorite episodes. The Chaperone is a really good SpongeBob episode. Also, just saying, let me know in the comments, how do you guys feel about these sections where I talk about rare characters? They're not necessarily Easter eggs, right? But they are still like a cool bit of trivia. So yeah, let me know if you guys actually enjoy these sections. Let me know in the comments. The episode The Krusty Bucket has a ton of really cool references, Easter eggs, and bits of trivia, so let's dive into it. I think you guys are really gonna like this one. At the start of this episode, Plankton sneaks into Mr. Krabs' house, hides in a cabinet, and steals one of Mr. Krabs' razors. As a matter of fact, Mr. Krabs even uses Plankton as a razor at one point by mistake. That did not look like a pleasant experience. Just imagine how nasty Mr. Krabs' chest hairs would be. Just like, oh my gosh. Anyways though, the point of all this for Plankton is that he wants to steal some of Mr. Krabs' DNA, but more on that in a moment. For now, let's go back to that washroom. And don't worry, we're not trying to get a peek at Mr. Krabs. We just want to look at this tube of toothpaste right here, as this is actually a direct nod to an earlier episode. This toothpaste brand is called Crust, and we've actually seen it before this, only once though, back in the episode Blackened Sponge. Back in that episode at the very start, SpongeBob is seen brushing his teeth before he falls and smacks his eye. He gets a nasty shiner. But yeah, if we zoom in on that toothpaste in Blackened Sponge, we can see it's also from the Crust brand. So the fact that the art team used this exact same brand, which had only appeared like once before this, was certainly intentional and is the type of Easter egg that I love. I love Easter eggs like this. And just saying this is for sure an Easter egg, it isn't like Kelpos, for example, where it's like a common in-world SpongeBob product that pops up often. For example, Kelpos appear in numerous episodes, whereas Crust has only appeared once before this. So yeah, them including it here was an Easter egg. I don't know why I over-explained that, but I gotta prove my point, you know what I mean, guys? I don't wanna ever be just spreading misinformation or making reaches. Also though, a fun fact here that is pretty obvious if you think about it, but the brand name Crust is definitely a spoof on the real-life toothpaste brand Crest. The logos and all that do not look similar, but it's definitely a spoof. Moving on though, as I said, the reason that Plankton wanted this DNA is for one of his new schemes. He takes the hair from the razor and mixes it together with his own DNA to create a combined clone known as Plain Crab. Once created, Plankton sends Plain Crab to the Krusty Krab to steal the formula. And while Plankton waits outside, he gets stepped on by a certain someone. Now, this certain somebody is actually a rare character. It's the character Colonel Carper, who first appeared back in the episode Hello Bikini Bottom. Back in that episode, this character hears SpongeBob and Squidward perform and wants to manage them, but Mr. Krabs takes over after hearing about the money, of course, forcing Carper out. Now, after that first appearance, he disappeared from the show for like 8+ years. He just was not in any other episodes. But then he randomly returned in this episode, The Krusty Bucket, giving us a little reunion. It's cool to see him back, and it's cool to see that the animators and art team, instead of just using a random incidental here, they chose to use a character we hadn't seen for a while. This was certainly intentional. Now, as I said, Plankton was waiting for Plain Crabs to get the secret formula, but instead he turns on everyone. He turns on Plankton and turns on Mr. Krabs and kicks out everybody except for SpongeBob, Squidward, and the customers, and pretty much just takes over the Krusty Krab. So Mr. Krabs and Plankton try to work together, even attempting to jump Plain Crabs at one point. Like, they literally wait in an alley and are about to just jump him with weapons.
Hey, what the
Dude, Mr. Krabs is wild for that one, and unfortunately it fails. And eventually, Plankton and Mr. Krabs turn on each other, getting into a fight inside the Krusty Krab that leads them into the Krusty Krab bathroom. And this is where we can find another Easter egg. During this section of the episode, Krabs and Plankton fight inside one of the stalls. And the rare character, Administrator Flotsam, can be seen in the stall right next to Plankton and Krabs.
Hey, I am trying to read!
This is another very rare SpongeBob character, and them being in the washroom is actually like a gag with the character. Administrator Flotsam has only appeared in 4 episodes before this, so he is very rare, but whenever he does appear, it's always for some reason in the Krusty Krab washroom. For example, in the episode The Ballad of Filthy Muck, he appears in this scene in the Krusty Krab bathroom, and this also happens in The Return of the Dirty Bubble, in this scene right here. I don't know why the dude is always in the Krusty Krab washroom. I don't know what he's doing in there, but he's in there in this episode, which is a reference to all of his past appearances. And again, this character is very rare, so seeing him pop up again was definitely intentional by the art team. Speaking of that washroom scene with Mr. Krabs and Plankton fighting and them interrupting the administrator's dump, poor guy. Imagine just trying to take a poop and then Mr. Krabs and Plankton are just fighting. But speaking of that scene, there was also a deleted scene planned for this section that got cut. In another stall, there was supposed to be a young young boy who was also disturbed by the fighting while doing his business, with multiple objects like an anchor, a stray tire, and even a freaking television comedically being thrown in his stall. This ended up being cut from the final episode. And I mean, if you think about it, it was most likely due to it depicting a child character using the washroom. I mean, the kid is very clearly clothed in the storyboard, and the scene is in comedic taste, but yeah, I can understand why it was cut. But that is pretty much it for the Krusty Bucket, so let's head into another episode. But I just want to say thank you guys so much that we hit 10K subscribers. That's so rad. And it genuinely means so much to me, guys. I have a face reveal coming up this week, so stay tuned for that. The episode The Chaperone is all about SpongeBob taking Pearl to prom, which, I mean, let's be real, already sounds like a disaster just waiting to happen. At the start of the episode, Pearl storms into the Krusty Krab, crying and really upset. Our girl is very depressed. And when I say crying, I mean she like literally floods the entire restaurant with her tears. It's crazy, and it turns out that she could not find a prom date. So Mr. Krabs starts looking for somebody that can take her. At first, he suggests Squidward, who obviously wants absolutely nothing to do with this, before finally deciding that SpongeBob is the answer. Now, lucky for us, some storyboard images from this opening have been released over the years. There's this one right here showing SpongeBob hiding with this pot over his head, and another one, this one right here, of Squidward looking completely uninterested when Mr. Krabs suggests him as Pearl's date. Oh, there's also a storyboard image from the exact moment where Mr. Krabs lifts SpongeBob up and basically offers him to Pearl, like, you know, he's solving the problem. And yeah, you guys know I love showing the storyboard and sketches, especially when we line them up with, you know, the final cut of the episode. It's cool to see how all this stuff is done. Also though, during that same opening scene, there's a background detail that you probably missed. If we look closely, all of the customers in the Krusty Krab, you know, the ones who were nearly murdered and drowned by Pearl's crying, since she literally flooded the place, but yeah, all of these different incidentals are very clearly based on Fred's character model, aka Incidental 1. Normally a scene like this would have a bunch of different incidentals, especially since by this point, the art team already had like 100 different incidental characters to pull from, but this scene actually was the debut of two new Fred variants, Incidental 1B and Incidental 1C. And we know their names due to this art I'm showing on screen right here. This is early art of both of their characters, like model art of them. And as you can see, the producers labeled their names here. So yeah, it wasn't just the art team randomly copying and pasting Fred over and over again. These were actually new variants of our boy Fred. Thank goodness they survived though, because like I said, Pearl nearly drowned them. Like they were almost cooked. Now, after SpongeBob gets chosen as Pearl's date, he heads home to get ready and tries to turn himself into what Pearl said she wanted.
That's because there's only one fish in the sea as long, tan, and handsome as he is.
As you just heard, Pearl wants somebody who's long, tan, and handsome. So SpongeBob puts on these fake legs and changes his look up completely before showing up at Mr. Krabs' house to pick up Pearl. And speaking of Mr. Krabs' house, during this scene, there's actually a small change to the Krabs residence that's very easy to miss. I hinted at this in a previous video, but if you've been keeping up with all of these season 1 videos I've been doing, you'll remember that back in the episode Squeaky Boots, we got our first ever look at Mr. Krabs' house. And back then, his house had this chain attached to it. Right here, I'm arrowing it. For some reason though, in The Chaperone, that chain is gone. And from this episode onward, that detail pretty much just disappears completely. I mean, it's not really a big deal, like who cares? But I do wonder why they decided to move it. You know, it's probably just one of those tiny early series design changes where you could tell that the show was still deciding which details were going to stay and be permanent. From here, SpongeBob and Pearl head to prom, and this is where the episode introduces a ton of new characters. Since the scene takes place at a high school prom, the production team needed background characters who actually felt like teenagers. So this episode expands the teen incidental group, a group of teen characters that had already appeared back in Squeaky Boots. They're teen incidentals, they're Pearl's friends, but in The Chaperone, the production team added a lot more to that group, and this is where the group actually got the name of Teen Incidentals. Now, most of these new teen incidentals, aside from Pearl's friend group, are anchovies, which makes sense because the show could could use them to fill out the dance floor and make the prom feel crowded without making every single background character look totally different. It's actually a really smart, like 2D animation technique if you think about it. Now, some of these teen characters have returned to the series later on after this episode. For example, Teen 1, who's also known as Billy Fishkins, later pops up in the episode Don't Look Now, where he now works at the Reef Cinema, so he got a job. Teen 2, also known as Brian Flounder, shows up years later at Plankton's funeral in the episode The Ghost of Plankton, which I'm not sure why he's there, but yeah. It is cool though that even though a lot of these characters were made just to fill out the prom for this episode, some of them have actually stuck around since. Moving on though, the prom also introduced us to this dude right here, the photo fish, who takes SpongeBob and Pearl's picture. Now, he definitely seems like the type of character that would only exist for this one joke and then never show up again, like a one-off, but weirdly enough, he returns almost 20 years later in the episode Krusty Concessionaires. And when he comes back, he's basically doing the exact same thing. If we look and we do a side-by-side, he's standing in the exact same position, and he's even using the same old camera, which is kind of funny because you'd think with all of the time that's passed since the chaperone, like it's been like 20 years, that this dude would have upgraded his camera by now. He's still using a camera from like the late 90s. We gotta get like a GoFundMe going for our boy here so we can fund a new camera for him. Okay, but back to the plot. So things at prom actually go okay for a little bit, all right? Pearl's friends are actually pretty shocked to see her with somebody so tall, and for a moment, SpongeBob's long fake legs actually kind of work. But I mean, let's be real, this is SpongeBob here, so it doesn't take long before he starts embarrassing her. For example, he tries to get punched for himself and Pearl, but his fake legs begin to malfunction, and people start realizing that something is up with this weird sponge at their prom. And it's the worst timing too, as right when this happens, Octavius Rex shows up. This dude is Pearl's ex-boyfriend, and she really does not want him to see her with SpongeBob as her weird prom date, so she and SpongeBob hide. Now, Octavius is another character you would probably expect to be a one-off, right? But he actually shows up multiple times after this. At the end of the chaperone, he gets jealous after seeing SpongeBob and Pearl having fun together, so he asks Pearl to dance, but she rejects him. Well, after season 1, Octavius Rex seems to have moved on from Pearl, and eventually starts dating Incidental 24. And we know this because if we jump forward to the episode There's a Sponge in My Soup, Incidental 24, who is presumably his girlfriend or wife, gets mad at him for accidentally kissing another girl. Which I mean is kind of justified, right ladies? Like, even if it was an accident, you don't kiss another girl. But yeah, then years later, even after There's a Sponge in My Soup, in the episode The Goofy Newbie, we can see that he now works at the Goofy Goober's ice cream party boat. So our dude got a job, but I mean, take this as a reminder, kids, finish school or you might end up working at an ice cream shop like 15 plus years after high school, which there isn't anything entirely wrong with. You know, I worked in fast food for years, but it's probably best to avoid that. I'm sure Goofy Goober's ice cream party boat is only paying our boy minimum wage. Now, shortly after Octavia shows up, we get one more debut. And this one is definitely more low-key. Like, I'm sure a lot of you guys are not even gonna care about it, but I gotta mention everything. It's what I do here, right? But this dude right here is the football player Incidental. And yeah, most people would never care or notice this dude, but I'm only mentioning him because he does actually appear again later in the series. And that's usually my rule with random background characters. If they only show up one time and it's a one-off, I usually don't need to make a big deal out of them or even talk about them. But the football player actually has a few appearances after this. For example, he can be seen watching a concert in Hello Bikini Bottom, and even around 20 years later, he returns in the episode Mandatory Music, where he's seen watching Squidward's concert. So I guess the dude is not just, you know, a football player, he's also really into live music. He's just like me. I don't know if you guys know this, but like aside from content creation, music's like my biggest passion. Who knows, maybe the random football player Incidental will come to one of my shows one day. It'd be an honor. But yeah, by the end of the episode, SpongeBob saves the night by introducing everyone to his new dance move, the sponge. Well, kind of. At first, it actually goes really well. SpongeBob becomes the life of the party, and everybody at prom starts to copy his dance. But unfortunately, this becomes dangerous. Like, the dance gets so intense and complicated that people start getting seriously injured. It gets so bad that students are being carried out on stretchers. And there's a really cool panning shot showing all of the chaos. It's very impressive for 2D animation. Now, a storyboard image for this exact scene has been released, and what's really interesting is that the original version had even more extreme details. Like, that panning shot was supposed to be like a lot more like extreme. For example, if we look at this note right here, the storyboard team told the animators that a severed fishtail was supposed to twitch on the ground. And if we look at this note right here, we can see that another planned moment asking if anyone had seen his missing arms. The production team even made a model sheet for the severed fishtail, which is insane for such a quick gag, but it also makes sense that some of these details were cut. I mean, kind of, right? Like SpongeBob has lots of very like gruesome and like, you know what I mean? Like SpongeBob can be kind of crazy sometimes. But I guess what's going on here is because everyone is a fish in Bikini Bottom, this severed fishtail kind of implies that somebody got like cut in half. But yeah, for whatever reason, a lot of these details that we can see from the storyboard were cut. And instead we got this scene right here. But it is still a really cool panning shot. I mean, come on, it's awesome. But yeah, that's it for this episode. Lots of cool stuff as you guys seen. And let's talk about more SpongeBob Easter eggs, guys. Real quick though, if you're new, make sure to subscribe. I don't know if you guys know this, but I'm one of the only non-AI SpongeBob sleep channels. There's tons of non-AI SpongeBob channels, but when it comes to like sleep content, I'm like the only real person making it. Like I use no AI in my content. So yeah, if you guys want to support somebody who uses no AI, please consider subscribing. And a massive thank you to everybody who is already subscribed. Like seriously, I'm gonna shut up, but I'm very thankful. You guys have genuinely changed my life. Like this has become my job now. So like I'm stoked. So the episode A Fish Called Sandy from season 15 actually has like almost an entire video's worth of Easter eggs. Like I'm gonna be honest with you guys, this is the most amount of Easter eggs I think I've ever covered in one episode, as this episode A Fish Called Sandy has so many, and there's actually a lot of interesting lore and fun facts about this episode as well. But yeah, the episode opens with a scene that immediately lets us know that this is going to be a nostalgic episode, as it kicks off right off the bat with an Easter egg. We see this orange scallop right here perched up on a wooden stand, just chilling in the morning sun. And if this looks familiar, it's because it's nearly a shot-for-shot recreation of the opening of a season 1 episode. If we go back to Opposite Day, that 1999 episode, we get a very similar scene where a scallop sat outside of Squidward's house, and here in this new episode, it mirrors the scene exactly, even down to the like same exact wooden perch. Like if we show them side by side, we can see that it's even the same little wooden platform. And yeah, it's a fitting start for an episode designed as a loving visual tribute to SpongeBob's early years, as you guys will see. I mean, even the title itself, A Fish Called Sandy, is actually a playful reference to the 1988 comedy film A Fish Called Wanda. In fact, the premise of this episode also riffs on the famous short story The Fly and its 1986 film remake about a scientist's experiment gone awry. Here, Sandy Cheeks plays the role of the bold experimenter eager to swap her DNA with a fish, a scenario that promises a lot of comedy and, as you'll see, is jam-packed with so many Easter eggs, guys, like holy cow. Also, just saying, guys, I am a little sick. I just played another concert with my band. Here are some photos from the concert. And I was singing a lot. I sang like 30 songs, so if my voice is a little bit shaky, that's why. But also, you guys get to see these photos, and it's just another reminder that I am not AI and I'm a real boy. But let's keep it going. At the very start of this episode, after the scene with that scallop, Sandy and SpongeBob meet up, and when we first see SpongeBob, he's found goofing around with a crumbled gum wrapper, making it flutter and fold for his own amusement. SpongeBob is a very simple boy. Well, longtime viewers might recognize this as a subtle nod to the season 1 episode, The Paper. You know, the episode where SpongeBob famously entertained himself with like a scrap piece of paper, which caused Squidward to literally go crazy. I'm pretty sure he even gives SpongeBob like the deed to his house to get the paper back. But yeah, this seems to be somewhat of a callback to that, but it also might be a coincidence. Nonetheless, this small detail immediately sets the tone. Nick Jennings, the show's original art director from seasons 1 to 3, makes his return after over 20 years. He was missing for a while, and this dude jam-packed this episode with subtle touches to the show's early days. Even the title card art uses the same background style and hand-drawn lettering from the first season. For example, here's a side-by-side. And there's a ton of other things that make it clear that A Fish Called Sandy is deliberately steeped in nostalgia. But back to the plot. Sandy invites SpongeBob into her tree dome, eager to show off her latest invention. As they enter, observant fans are greeted by an old friend, a very nostalgic Easter egg right here. As if we zoom in over here we can see Birdie, the same orange bird from Sandy's debut episode, Tea at the Tree Dome. And if we rewind in Sandy's first episode, this little bird was happily seen splashing in the bird bath in that episode as well, only to be rudely interrupted when a desperate SpongeBob dove in to soak up water. Here, over 2 decades later, we see Birdie again, making for a really cool callback. Inside the dome, Sandy unveils her new invention, the Fish You Up machine, a contraption designed to swap genetic traits between animals. It's actually really cool, and as she explains its function, she affectionately calls SpongeBob Square Dude.
Boop that button, Square Dude! Boop.
This nickname is actually a reference to Tea at the Tree Dome as well. As in SpongeBob and Sandy's very first meeting back in that episode, Sandy says the following line.
Hold on there, little square dude!
Back in that season 1 episode, it was the first time Sandy ever used that moniker, and it was pretty much the last until this episode. And this is just the tip of the iceberg, guys. There are so many more Easter eggs in this episode. So let's keep it going. As the machine zaps Sandy and Fred, poor Fred, by the way, he was just like signed up against his own will for this experiment, clearly. But as the transformation happens, Sandy undergoes a cartoonishly detailed transformation. We see her grow gills on her neck while her lungs shrivel up, which is animated in almost the exact same way as a scene from the season 2 episode Pressure. If we go back to that episode, Sandy challenged the others to see who could last longer without their usual habitat. And when she removed her helmet underwater, her lungs visibly shrank and dried out as she struggled to hold her breath. Well, a fish called Sandy replicates that visual gag lovingly, with her pink lugs deflating just like balloons, just like SpongeBob fans saw back in 2001. Here's a side-by-side, and as you can see, it's very, very similar. Also, to cap it off, the sound effect used when Sandy's lungs are shrinking is actually the very same sound effect that we heard when SpongeBob himself shrank down to a withered sponge on the grill back in Nature Pan. Here's the sound effect from A Fish Called Sandy. And now here's the sound effect from Nature Pants. Hopefully you guys can see what I'm saying here, but they're pretty much the same sound effect. Moving on though, when the smoke clears, Sandy's experiment appears to be a success, at least initially. She now has gills like a fish, meaning she can breathe underwater without her air helmet. But this whole mad science setup is actually more than just a plot device. It's the show's playful take on The Fly, which we mentioned earlier, with Sandy effectively turning into the fish in this scenario. The episode embraces the classic science fiction vibe while filtering it through SpongeBob's quirky lens, giving it that Nickelodeon spin. It's really cool. It's kind of interesting how like the SpongeBob team does this. It's actually a very common thing where there'll be references to very obscure media. The Fly isn't necessarily obscure, but if you're like under the age of like 30, you're not really gonna get the reference, which is why I'm here. With Sandy now able to live like a fish, she and SpongeBob embark on a day of fun. And this kicks off an extended montage that, dude, has so many Easter eggs in it, and there's a reason for it. As I mentioned before, this episode served as a one-time return for Nick Jennings, the original art director for the show back in the first 3 seasons, which for those of you who don't really understand this role, I'm not gonna go into like depth about it, but pretty much Nick would handle all art. He was in charge of all the art. He'd work with all of the different artists, the storyboard artists, and was a big part of the art style and all of the art tropes from the show's original first few seasons. He was a big deal and really shaped a lot of our childhoods if you're someone like me. So this dude made sure that nearly every shot in this sequence contains a familiar background, character, or gag. For example, the first stop is this meadow where Sandy and SpongeBob frolic and sniff flowers together. Looks like a good time. Well, you may recognize that this backdrop or background right here is actually from the episode Fun, more specifically from SpongeBob's famous Fun song, where we see SpongeBob dance through a meadow of flowers while teaching Plankton about friendship. If we do a side-by-side, we'll see that here, the exact same flower-dotted landscape is lovingly recreated, as SpongeBob and Sandy take a moment to appreciate the bloom. And you've probably noticed now at the side-by-side, this is more than a pretty background. It's a direct callback to a fan favorite musical moment from like 1999, and it's made even more special because Nick Jennings, if we go and look at the credits of the episode Fun, was actually the art director who contributed to this original meadow. And this is going to be a running theme throughout this entire video. So let's continue. After the Fun reference, the montage then kicks into a lively pace. SpongeBob and Sandy don their karate gear, with SpongeBob in red gloves and Sandy in her green, just like the outfits they wore back in Karate Choppers. Another reference. Also, for a brief scene, the pair engage in some friendly karate sparring, which also seems to reference that season 1 episode where their karate obsession first got out of hand back in Karate Chopper. And there's more going on here. Seashell Park, where Sandy and SpongeBob practiced karate back in the same episode, Karate Choppers. This might not seem like actually a big deal, but Seashell Park is a location that hasn't been seen often since its original appearance, making its reappearance here a treat for hardcore fans. The animators even restructured a tiny background detail from the earlier seasons. For example, we can see a Porto Head portable toilet in the park right here. And again, this might not seem like it's a big deal. It might just seem like a random porta potty, right? But this specific outhouse was a common art trope back in the show's first 3 seasons. For example, it was a prop in episodes like Bubble Buddy from season 2 and SpongeGuard on Duty from season 3. But once Nick Jennings left the show after season 4, it visually disappeared from the show entirely. Like, that's a fact. If we look at any episodes after season 4, none of them have this prop, the Porto Head portable toilet. Well, it reappears here in A Fish Called Sandy, and I don't think it's a coincidence that this is the episode where Nick Jennings returned. So a really cool Easter egg that's kind of like a deep cut. It's seemingly kind of mundane, right? Like, I'm sitting here over explaining a porta potty, but when you understand the lore and history, this is really cool. It is a reference to the show's earlier seasons. And we're not done yet. The montage's rapid fire tributes continue as SpongeBob and Sandy have a laugh in downtown Bikini Bottom. They're shown standing in the city making disgusting armpit farts, which, just saying, back when I was a kid, armpit farts would like really gross me out for some reason. I don't know why. Anything fart related as a kid would make me like so uncomfortable, which is kind of weird, right? I don't know why. I don't even know why I'm telling you this, but this is just the relationship we have, all right? Cartoon Corey and, you know, his subscribers, we have an open relationship. But yeah, they're doing armpit farts right here. And even this shot has a bunch of references. For one, a very specific anchovy incidental character walks past them. A lot of you probably aren't catching this, but this fish is familiar. In fact, he's one of the incidental crowd characters first seen way back in the episode Fun. Specifically from when SpongeBob was searching for plankton, this anchovy, sometimes dubbed as incidental CM2, hasn't appeared in like decades. He was essentially a one-off, one-time background character from 1999, most likely created by Nick Jennings. Well, Nick Jennings brought him back, giving us another deep cut detail only nerds like me would ever notice. And the SpongeBob fandom wiki. I'm gonna give them credit for this one. As if that weren't enough, the background of this street scene features the return of this giant red flower arch that eagle-eyed fans might recall from early episodes like Pizza Delivery, Suds, and Nature Pants. This large flower-shaped archway was another signature background element in the first 3 seasons, often visible in wide shots of Bikini Bottom that vanished after Jennings left the show. Again, this is another one that might seem very random, but the lore and history that I'm explaining here is what makes it cool. SpongeBob and the gang never actually visit this thing back in season 1, 2, or 3, and honestly, it's actually a pretty random background detail, but as I mentioned, after season 3, it disappeared. 10-year-old me, like 10-year-old little Corey, certainly did not notice, and I doubt that any of you watching did either, but we now know the answer as to why, and that's that Nick Jennings left the show. So see, some of these things I'm talking about, they're like random and they seem kind of like mundane, but hopefully you guys are getting the picture here. With the lore, it's actually very interesting stuff. And I mean, I don't mean to brag, as I always say, this is what all content creators should be doing. Like, if you want to make content on YouTube, you should be going the extra mile, but this just shows how hard I go, because if you were to go and look at the Wikipedia page for this episode, all right, the SpongeBobpedia page, there's lots of the stuff I'm talking about, but I've added so much additional lore and history here, and it's because I love this stuff. It's just so interesting to me. I need to touch grass, but let's keep it going. Another quick segment during that same montage shows SpongeBob and Sandy romping across a field of like hydrothermal vents, these things right here, and as they hop from vent to vent, a blast of hot water from one vent blows SpongeBob straight upward, separating his body from his pants for a split second. Well, this visual gag is a clever reference to the Funhouse scene all the way back in Valentine's Day from season 1. In that episode's carnival montage, SpongeBob and Patrick walk through a funhouse, where a gust of air blows SpongeBob up, briefly stretching him apart in a very similar cartoonish fashion. I like these ones, honestly, like these kinds of homages where they take a classic gag and reimagine it in a new context show that some of the production team is familiar with the show's history, which is important, right? Like that's the issue with some of modern SpongeBob, is you can tell that the team making modern SpongeBob isn't always super knowledgeable about the show's lore and history. But anyways, I'm rambling, and we're still not done yet, as even SpongeBob's signature pastime, bubble blowing, gets a nod. In one scene, Sandy struggles to blow a bubble, until SpongeBob steps in to demonstrate the technique, just as he famously taught Patrick back in the episode Bubble Stand, another season 1 episode. Now, after a whirlwind day of fun, like Sandy and SpongeBob did a lot of stuff in this episode, especially in that montage. But as it winds down, SpongeBob and Sandy find themselves atop a hill overlooking jellyfish fields. They got a really nice view, just saying, look at how pretty this looks. If we look closely though, this very beautiful moment hides yet another Easter egg in plain sight. If we zoom in right here, we can see a rock-shaped snail, and this is another reference. As if we go back to the episode Nature Pants, this season 1 episode has a moment where SpongeBob tries to live among the jellyfish, and in one scene, to escape a furious Patrick who's trying to get him to come back to society and be a normal person, SpongeBob camouflaged himself by hiding behind a certain something. Now, if we look at these side by side, we can see that very same snail design, a stony shell with a snail's eyes peeking out, is present here, giving us another really cool Easter egg and reference to another classic episode. This is like a 26-year-old reference right here, pretty cool. Back to the plot though, as this moment at Jellyfish Field leads to this episode's turning point, where Sandy starts to shed her fur since she's transformed into a fish now. And when the molting finally stops, we get a close-up of Sandy's new fishy appearance, and she strikes a pose that I kind of found familiar. If we head back to the episode Tea at the Tree Dome, once again, this pose in A Fish Called Sandy is nearly identical to a pose Sandy held, specifically when she first introduced herself to SpongeBob. If we look at them side by side, it isn't like exact, but I mean it's pretty darn close, right? Like let me know in the comments what you think. I think that this was a direct reference. But of course, SpongeBob is astonished and a little concerned by Sandy's fully fishy transformation. Like imagine your friend just transforming into a different creature, but Sandy herself is like stoked about this. And this leads us to Goo Lagoon, where Sandy wants to see if she can actually swim now that she's all fishy. And this location gives us even more Easter egg. And if we look closely, working the counter is none other than the same chef, this guy right here, from all the way back in the episode Ripped Pants. If you don't recognize him, let me explain. This burly purple fish wearing a white t-shirt and a cool chef's hat ran the Goo Lagoon snack bar back in Ripped Pants.
Delivery! Did you order 20 cases of Ripped Pants? Ah!
Oh.
He's only appeared like a few times since. Like for example, he made like a quick cameo in the episode Abandoned Twits, but this episode marks his true return to the series. And there's more going on here, as when SpongeBob leans casually against the McFlaky stand, the background music playing is very familiar. It's a track called You're Nice, and it's actually the very same tune used as the title card music for Ripped Pants. SpongeBob's pose itself here is also a direct reference. He props an arm onto the counter and kicks one foot up behind him, which is almost exactly how he leaned on the ice cream stand back in Ripped Pants just before delivering his lame joke. Seeing SpongeBob strike this same stance here with Sandy by his side chuckling is another really cool reference. But this is where things get really interesting. After grabbing some snacks, SpongeBob and Sandy depart Goo Lagoon and head home. And as they walk along the roadside, viewers are treated to one of the most unexpected location reveals in SpongeBob history. Fish Hook's park reappears right here. This This very rare area, an open field just with a ton of dangling fish hooks everywhere, was of course the central setting of the iconic season 1 episode Hooky. And I mean, it pretty much hasn't been seen since. It's a very rare location, so seeing it here is kind of a big deal. Like if we go back to Hooky, SpongeBob and Patrick infamously played on these fishing hooks like carnival rides, despite Mr. Krabs' warning that they'll end up dead in the gift shop, if you guys remember. It's a classic episode, and to see the same park drawn again here is a deep cut for fans. There's also another musical reference here, as fittingly, the musical score that plays as they approach this location is The Great White, the same dramatic tune that debuted in the original Hooky episode. So not only is there like a physical Easter egg here, but there's also like an audio Easter egg. How cool is that? I would play them, but I'm not trying to get like spirit bombed by Nickelodeon copyright, so let's not risk it. As you can imagine though, Sandy, now fully transformed into like a fishy sea creature, cannot resist the shiny hooks, just like Patrick couldn't all those years ago. So she peers up at a particularly enticing baited hook. Well, there's another Easter egg here, as one of the very worms from all the way back in Rockabye Bavalve is shown curled around the hook Sandy has her eyes on. If you guys need a refresher, it's this worm from Rockabye Bavalve. I'm gonna play the clip, take a look.
Hello, sea creatures! I bring you greetings from Apple World! Wait! We will bury you!
This little purple worm was last seen being plucked from his apple home in that clip I just played you. Somehow I guess he like survived, I don't know how, because here he is again, about to be eaten by Sandy. If we do a side-by-side, we'll see that his design with the same cute face and purple body is duplicated exactly. It's like a perfect match. Anyways though, inevitably, Sandy takes the bait, literally. Unable to fight her fishy instincts, she bites the hook, and in an instant, she's yanked upward. This whole sequence lovingly parodies the climax of Hooky, but with the roles reversed. In Hooky, SpongeBob himself got snagged on a hook and was nearly reeled to the surface before jumping off at the last second. In fact, SpongeBob's facial expression of shock as Sandy is pulled upward is drawn exactly like a reaction shot from Karate Choppers, of all places. Specifically the face he made when Mr. Krabs fired him for doing karate at work. It's a very odd reference, but side by side you can see the similarities. It isn't identical, but it is close. Above the ocean, we see live action footage of fishermen on a boat. Another callback to Hooky, which also cut to real fishermen whenever a character was pulled from the water. The fishermen in this episode, however, get a surprise. Instead of a tasty fish, they've reeled in a confused sea squirrel hybrid. In a comedic twist on catch and release, the anglers take one look at Sandy and decide she's not worth, can't really blame them. So they toss her back into the ocean. By now, Sandy is fully embraced behaving like a fish, which leads to one final crazy chase scene. Back in the water, transformed and running on instinct, Sandy starts running through Bikini Bottom. And as SpongeBob pursues her, we get another cool Easter egg, a deep cut, as we can see SpongeBob passes by a wooden fence where we see Gary the snail perched on top, singing a sea shanty tune that we've heard before, as this is actually a recreation of the ending scene from I Was a Teenage Gary. Back in that season 1 episode, a snailified SpongeBob and Squidward joined Gary on a fence to sing a meowing version of Blow the Man Down as the show ended.
Meow, 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 meow.
Meow, 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 meow.
Here in A Fish Called Sandy, only Gary is present on the fence, but he's singing the exact same song.
Meow, 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 meow. Meow, meow.
Dude, what a cool reference. This is a very easy one to miss, but a really cool reference nonetheless. And guys, that actually does it for this episode. Can you believe there was that many Easter eggs in this one freaking episode? Holy cow. I hope you guys enjoyed all the Easter eggs I found, and let's talk about more in another episode. Yo, just a heads up guys, my voice was a little bit off when recording this one. I just did a show with my band, and I had to do like screaming for this show, like holy cow. So just, yeah, it was a lot of my voice, but I still wanted to get another video out and just, yeah, let's dive into it. And I love you guys, just saying thank you to everybody who's been supporting the channel. I'm very, very thankful. The episode Pizza Delivery is one of my favorite season 1 SpongeBob episodes. I watched this episode as a kid on TV, and I feel like it was one of the perfect examples of SpongeBob and Squidward's love-hate dynamic. And it actually makes sense when you look at where the idea actually came from. Back when SpongeBob was still being developed, Stephen Hillenburg wanted to pitch an episode where SpongeBob and Squidward went on a road trip together. The idea was inspired by the 1989 movie Pow Wow Highway, which involved a more innocent character traveling with a crankier one. Hillenburg worked on this road trip concept with Aaron S. and Sherm C., 2 other writers on the show. And during that process, they came up with a lot of the gags and character ideas that would eventually be used in Pizza Delivery. But before that, at one point, this road trip story could have become the actual pitch episode sent into Nickelodeon. But Hillenburg eventually moved away from that idea and chose Help Wanted instead, which looking back was probably the right move, since Help Wanted introduced SpongeBob, the Krusty Krab, and the basic world of the series in a much cleaner way. But that road trip concept did not go to waste. Aaron and Sherm brought it back during season 1, and a lot of those early ideas they originally came up with eventually became Pizza Delivery, this exact episode. So yeah, don't worry, I wasn't just rambling on about all of that for the sake of length. That context is interesting, right? It's cool to know that like this episode, Pizza Delivery, one of my favorites, could have been the first episode of SpongeBob or the pilot episode. But like I said, Help Wanted was definitely a much safer choice. But yeah, man, in a weird way, this episode is almost like a leftover version of what the SpongeBob pilot could have been. But what makes that even more interesting is that Pizza Delivery was not just an ordinary season 1 episode thrown together later. Despite being the 10th season 1 segment to air, Sherm C has said that it was actually the first regular episode worked on after the pilot. So even more background information for you guys about this one, Pizza Delivery was the 2nd episode ever made after Help Wanted. And honestly, thinking back, it's easy to understand why Nickelodeon may have sat on this episode for a little while, as the entire setup of the episode depends on viewers already understanding the Krusty Krab. Help Wanted introduces the restaurant and SpongeBob's job there, while other episodes like Plankton help establish how valuable a Krabby Patty is in this show's world. So by the time this episode Pizza Delivery aired, the Krusty Krab already felt like a successful restaurant. So the idea of Mr. Krabs suddenly selling Krabby Patty pizza lands a lot better. That early production timing also helps explain one detail that a lot of people miss. And I mean, it makes sense because, as I always say, this is something only a nerd like me would catch. And also, you know, the SpongeBob Wikipedia, I gotta give them some credit here as well. But believe it or not, this is one of the only SpongeBob episodes that does not feature any sort of bubble transition, which is crazy. I mean, when you think of SpongeBob, those transitions are a part of the show's DNA, right? But it goes back to that point I was just going over, as because Pizza Delivery was made so early in the production order, it seems to have been completed before those transitions were fully established as a regular part of the series. And that's why these types of things are interesting to me. This isn't me just reading off of a wiki, this is me bringing it all together. Bubble transitions are certainly a small thing, and I'm sure a lot of people wouldn't even notice this, but bro, I got too much free time, and this is the type of stuff that I like to obsess about. Moving on though, early in the episode, SpongeBob and Squidward set off in the boat to deliver the pizza, and one of the funniest visual gags happens before they even get stranded. Squidward tells SpongeBob to shift into reverse, but SpongeBob panics when he looks down at the gear shift, and for a split second, the words change to Korean. Now, if you've ever wondered what these words actually say, they're actually the Korean words for go forward and go backwards, or reverse. I feel like the gag kind of implies this, but if you were ever wondering exactly what the words mean, now you know, alright? And I've got even more pointless and random bits of trivia about this episode, so let's keep it going. As once the delivery starts going wrong, the episode introduces a couple of new background characters. And this is one of my favorite things to cover. You know, over the years, we've gotten such a huge cast of different incidental characters. And one thing I love about this series I've been doing, where I've been covering every season 1 episode, is we get to see how that cast cast of incidentals has slowly developed over time. For example, when we talked about the episode Ripped Pants, we've seen that all of these incidentals were introduced for the very first time in that episode. And while the incidentals that were introduced in this episode Pizza Delivery aren't the most interesting, it's still cool to analyze it all, so let's do that. As one of the new characters introduced in this episode is the Swordfish Trucker, who only appears briefly, and honestly is kind of forgettable, but the other character introduced might ring a bell for you guys a little bit, as it's this angry customer from the end of the episode who is very disappointed about not getting his Diet Dr. Kelp after SpongeBob and Squidward survive the entire trip and finally arrive at this guy's house. This customer flips out because he did not get the drink that he ordered. SpongeBob checks the order and realizes that there was never a drink listed, but the customer is not having it and the dude just tweaks out. And it actually leads to a really cool moment where Squidward stands up for SpongeBob, you know, the dude who annoys him and ruins all of his days off from work. He actually stands up for SpongeBob. But yeah, both of these characters were introduced in this episode. The Swordfish dude and then this guy, which he doesn't really have a name, we're just gonna call him the Rude Customer.
Or, as we like to say, the Crustomer.
But another interesting thing about this character is that it looks like he may have been based on Incidental 6, as when we put these two designs side by side, we can see a little bit of a resemblance. So I'm going to assume that this Rude Customer fish was adjusted from an existing background fish rather than being created completely from scratch. Nonetheless, after this episode, this Rude Customer character would pretty much disappear from the series for years. And for a long time, his role in Pizza Delivery felt like a complete one-off, until he finally returned, and he's appeared a couple of times since. But hopefully he's gotten over that whole Dr. Diet Kelp situation. And what a rude guy. If you've ever worked retail before, you know how rude customers are sometimes, and this guy's a prime example of it. So shout out to Squidward for shoving that pizza in his face. He deserved it. Moving on though, here's a random fact that I learned from the wiki when researching this episode, and it's a tiny detail that's very easy to miss, as when Squidward knocks on the door of that customer we were just talking about, his knocking lines up with the background music. Now, here's the difference between me and the wiki, is I'm going to play the audio and show you exactly what I'm talking about, so roll the clip. Now, it might have been intentional, or it might have just worked out perfectly in the final edit. Who knows? But either way, it is something that happens in this episode, and I wanted to talk about it. Oh, and before I forget and move on from this scene, for those of you who don't already know, that drink that the customer was complaining about, his Diet Dr. Kelp, is a very clear parody of Diet Dr. Pepper, which just thinking about that is making me really thirsty right now, guys. These voiceover sessions, you know, you gotta have a drink with you, and maybe for the next session, I'm gonna make sure I have a Dr. Diet Pepper or a Diet Dr. Kelp. Listen, all right, I'm an older millennial, I'm allowed to make cringe jokes like this, but another major production detail from Pizza Delivery has to do with the Krusty Krab itself, as this episode gave the art team one of the first concrete production references for the inside of the restaurant. Before this, they were still figuring out a lot of the Krusty Krab's interior layout. The episode Help Wanted had established the outside of the building and parts of the kitchen, but this episode Pizza Delivery helped lock in the dining area as an actual reusable space, as this piece of art was made for this episode and was most likely used as a reference shot for the animation. The art team needed a version of the interior that could be used consistently across the rest of the season, and this episode helped create that standard. Now, one last detail I find really funny is how specific the production art can get sometimes, as during the making of this episode, the art team even created a model sheet just for the Krusty Krab pizza box, which sounds kind of ridiculous at first because it's literally just a pizza box, and there's tons of items like this throughout SpongeBob that don't get model sheets. But I mean, it shows just how important this pizza box was to this episode that they even made like a reference sheet just for the pizza box. And I've made this joke before, but I gotta ask, would you eat a slice of a Krusty Krab pizza? Remember, it's made by Mr. Krabs just taking Krabby Patties and turning them into pizza, but would you eat a slice? I think I would. I would give it a try. But let's head over to another episode. And before we do, just a real quick reminder to everybody, I am one of the only SpongeBob Sleep channels that does not use AI in my content. I make all of this from scratch and put a lot of love into it. I don't just read off of a wiki. Like anything anything that I cover in this episode, guys, I have to go and confirm it's real, and I have to show it to you visually, which is what keeps this, you know, entertaining and fun. Also, just saying, I know not everybody likes sleep content, but there clearly is a big audience for it, so I do like the fact that I'm one of the few people that's providing this content for an audience that clearly wants it, but I'm not using AI, so just saying. But let's head over to another episode with more Easter eggs, and facts, and trivia, and all of that nerdy stuff that I care about way too much. Now, the episode Home Sweet Pineapple is an interesting one, as it's one of those season 1 episodes that doesn't have a huge amount of like behind the scenes trivia, but I've got lots of cool shit that I want to talk about from this episode. And before I do, real quick, and am I allowed to say that, guys? Are you gonna like unsubscribe to me? Back in the day when I used to work on that other channel, a lot of the audience was kids, so I've kind of trained my brain to not swear during videos, but you guys should hear me when I'm not in a video. You know, I swear a lot, but let me know, was me saying the word shit okay? I know some of you are gonna be like, just be your authentic self, but I feel like we've built a relationship here on this channel, and I care about your guys' perspective. So I'm gonna shut up and get into the Easter eggs and trivia, but let me know and be honest in the comments. But yeah, the first thing I wanna talk about is Bikini Atoll. Now, before this episode, Bikini Atoll had only really been seen in the theme song opening, where the camera drops from the island down into the underwater world of Bikini Bottom. But in Home Sweet Pineapple, the show actually brings that location into the episode itself. And I like this personally, as it's a cool little piece of world building, since it kind of makes the opening feel less like a random visual and more like an actual place that exists within the SpongeBob universe. Later on in later episodes, SpongeBob would actually visit this location in the season 2 episode, Pressure. But this is the first time that the show actually starts treating it as more than just part of the intro, with it getting a shot throughout the actual episode. But here's something that's way more important than that, and that's the introduction of SpongeBob's parents, Harold and Margaret Squarepants. After SpongeBob's pineapple house gets eaten by nematodes, which would really suck, dude. Like, they literally just eat his house, and my guy's just homeless for a majority of the episode. Like, but after that happens, he has nowhere to live. However, he does have one viable option, and that's moving back in with his mom and his dad. Any grown man's worst nightmare, to be honest with you. But yeah, this gave the writers a very natural reason to show them for the first time, right? It's a natural introduction to these characters. And it's important as it establishes that SpongeBob does have a family outside of Bikini Bottom. For all the episodes before this, it would just be focused on that main cast. But this was one of the first example of two like semi-reoccurring characters popping up. After this, Margaret and Harold would go on to become semi-regular characters, like I was saying, appearing in other episodes like New Digs or Walhalla. But Home Sweet Pineapple is where the show first pulls back the curtain and lets us meet SpongeBob's family. Also, in my opinion, it makes SpongeBob feel like a little bit more grounded, because even though he lives by himself and works at the Krusty Krab, this episode reminds us that SpongeBob does still have a family that he can technically go back to. I don't know why I'm overanalyzing this stuff so much, but like I said, guys, I just like this shit, man. You know? I just like it. Why would I go outside and do productive things when I could sit here and obsess over every single season 1 SpongeBob episode? But let's get back to the program here, alright? As that focus on SpongeBob's family also leads into a weird piece of Patrick lore. If we rewind a little bit, when SpongeBob first needs somewhere to stay, Patrick talks about his own house and casually reveals that he was kicked out of his parents' house years ago for unknown reasons.
Looks like we gotta move back with Mom and Pop.
Well, you can't move back in with your parents. When my parents kicked me out of the house, I never went back.
He then says he built his rock home entirely by himself. At the time, that was basically Patrick's only known backstory, considering the fact that his parents had not been introduced yet. So this might seem like insignificant right now, but at the time, this one throwaway line gave fans one of the first real pieces of information about his life before living under this rock right here. Years later, this would become a lot messier once the Patrick Star Show came along and gave Patrick a much more expanded family situation. So technically, this line has basically been retconned. But for a long time, this was one of the only explanations we had for why Patrick lived alone. But speaking of Patrick's house, this episode also fleshes out the rock location a little bit more than earlier appearances did. Amongst all of the production art released over the years, it's been revealed that this episode gave us some new angles of his rock home location. But I'd say the biggest detail is that we finally get to see the inside inside of Patrick's rock home for the very first time. At first, in this episode, it's shown with a green couch and this TV right here, which makes it seem like Patrick actually has a small living place under the rock. But then, later in the same episode, like literally the same episode, when SpongeBob stays with him after losing his pineapple home, the two of them sleep outside, and in shots when the rock is lifted up, the entire interior suddenly looks different. The couch and TV are gone, and it's basically just like a flat surface underneath the rock. And again, this all happens in literally the same episode. It's kind of funny because Patrick's house would go on to become one of the most inconsistent locations in the entire series. Like if we go to the episode I'm with Stupid, Patrick's home is presented as big enough for Patrick, his fake parents, and SpongeBob all to fit in there. But also if we go to an episode later in the series like Breath of Fresh Squidward, the place is large enough for Patrick to host an entire party. And this just continues, so stay tuned. Like I said, I'm doing all of these season 1 episodes, but guys, my goal is to do every single episode of SpongeBob like this, all the way up until season 16 or 17. By the time I'm done, it's gonna be like season 19, which is bonkers. But you'll see all of these inconsistencies and changes over the years, and that's why this series is interesting to me. I'm gonna just reiterate, this isn't me just reading off the wiki. It's gonna be really cool when I put all of these into one video, and we're able to go from episode 1 of season 1 all the way to the final segment of season 1 and see all of the changes and evolution of the series, which we've already done a lot so far because we're already like a decent way through season 1. So yeah, but that's pretty much it for Home Sweet Pineapple. Like I said originally, there isn't a bunch of crazy behind the scene details about this episode, but I do think the stuff that I did mention is interesting. Alright, let's keep the deep dive into SpongeBob season 1 going with Muscle Bob Buff Pants. And I mean, if you know Ball, you already know that this is a really good SpongeBob episode. But before we dive into all of the production details and behind the scenes details and Easter eggs and all that stuff, let's talk about the plot so you guys have context. Now, at the start of this episode, SpongeBob is trying to work out, but the dude can barely even lift these 2 stuffed animals. But then Sandy shows up and makes things even worse by casually revealing just how ripped she is. I mean, look at Sandy's arms, dude, like she is jacked. She tries to help SpongeBob by bringing him over to her tree dome for some real training. But instead of motivating SpongeBob, it just makes him feel even worse. But that's when he ends up seeing a late night infomercial for Anchor Arms.
With anchor arms! They slip on like a glove. Just add air.
These inflatable muscle arms that make him look just as jacked as Sandy without doing any of the actual work. The commercial is actually like really funny because it feels very accurate to those early 2000s infomercials. I'm a millennial, so I actually grew up with these on TV, but this scene also introduces the shark nerd character. Now in the commercial, he's supposed to be the before version of the tough guy who uses anchor arms, but the production team ended up taking that nerdy shark design and reusing him as a regular background character. He is admittedly pretty rare, but he has shown up a handful of times since his debut, appearing in episodes like SpongeGuard on Duty, and even years later in Boss for a Day. So I guess in universe, maybe he was just an actor in the commercial. Like the nerdy shark guy and the more confident one that uses anchor arms are probably just 2 different actors, you know, because it was a commercial. But moving on, after SpongeBob gets his anchor arms in the mail, he immediately heads down to Goo Lagoon to show off around all of the other bodybuilders. And this scene is actually pretty important because it gives us the second appearance of Muscle Beach. This is when the location actually gets its name. It isn't said out loud, but we see it on a billboard sign right at the beginning of the scene. And just saying, I love the spelling here because even though the whole area is clearly based around like muscles and weightlifting, the sign spells muscle like this, M-U-S-S-E-L, instead of how you would actually spell like a bicep muscle, you know, M-U-S-C-L-E. And this is a cute little like pun referencing actual muscles, if you guys don't know. These things, the little shell-covered creatures you find on beaches, which just saying, I feel kind of evil saying this considering the context, but that's like actually one of my favorite seafoods. But anyways, lucky for us, some early artwork of this location and the billboard has been released over the years, so we can actually compare the rough version of Muscle Beach to what it ended up being in the final episode. The shots are pretty similar as you can see here. Speaking of that early artwork though, you may have noticed that this episode had a different title during production. As you can see on the artwork I literally just showed you, it was originally called Pump It Up, which honestly makes a lot of sense because SpongeBob literally has to pump up the anchor arms to make them work. We see him do this multiple times in the episode. I will say though, I do think Muscle Bob Buff Pants is a lot better. It's just an iconic title, but maybe that's because I'm used to it.
Have you guys seen SpongeBob anywhere?
You mean Muscle Bob Buff Pants? He's in there?
Whatever, thanks.
Now, once SpongeBob gets to Muscle Beach, we get a slow panning shot of all of the bodybuilders working out, and this is where the episode introduces us to a bunch of new incidental variants. Before this episode, the show already had a few muscular background characters, the most notable being Incidental 24, who first appeared back in Ripped Pants. But because Muscle Bob Buff Pants is so focused on weightlifting and bodybuilders, the production team needed more variety than just using the same beach-goer fish that were all introduced for Goo Lagoon back in Ripped Pants. So to solve this, they created multiple variants of Incidental 24, with around 6 different versions being made. Each one was given a different letter to separate them. For example, there's Incidental 24B, Incidental 24C, and Incidental 24Q, and so on. As you can see, they all have the same general bodybuilder look, but they each use different colors and slightly different fin shapes to make the beach feel more populated. It's a very small thing, but I really like that the artists put this much effort into what could have been easily just another throwaway background shot. Also, what's interesting here is that even though they were just made for this one episode, some of the variants have continued popping up years later. For example, Incidental 24B and Incidental 24Q even appeared again in season 16, during this shot right here. So yeah, the production team is still pulling from these old bodybuilder designs. Now, right after all of those variants are introduced, SpongeBob shows up with his fake muscles, and everyone at the beach is shocked. They barely even recognize him, which is hilarious, since he looks exactly the same, except for, you know, the new giant ripped arms that he has. Everyone questions if this is the same SpongeBob that they know, and in response, SpongeBob says the following.
Who are you expecting? Tiny Tim? Wait. Big aren't they?
Now, I personally didn't get this, I stole this from the wiki, but this is actually a very random reference to the real Tiny Tim, the singer of the song Livin' in the Sunlight, Lovin' in the Moonlight, which might not be very recognizable to you guys at first, but if you're a true SpongeBob fan, you'll know it the second you hear it, since it was used back in Help Wanted during the scene where SpongeBob feeds all of the anchovies and saves the Krusty Krab. Like I said, it's a very random callback, and I doubt most people would catch it, but hey, I love random shit like this, as you guys know. Now from here, SpongeBob starts showing off a little too much, and Sandy eventually pushes him into the beach's anchor throwing competition. This is obviously a huge problem for SpongeBob because the dude only looks strong. He is still a pretty big weakling. For example, earlier in the episode, he can't even lift his drink up at the juice bar. So throwing an anchor is like completely out of the question. But yeah, once the competition begins, the episode introduces another type of background character, and that's the crowd incidentals. These were created because the competition needed an audience in the bleachers, and instead of animating a ton of unique fish individually, the animators made 6 crowd incidentals and looped their movements. Here, I'm gonna show you guys. If we watch the audience shots closely, especially if we slow them down, we can see that they all use the same animations. They're just like repeated and looped and timed differently to give the illusion that there's a bunch of different fish here in this crowd. It's actually a really smart animation shortcut because it makes the scene feel busy without requiring every single character to be animated from scratch. Even to this day, the show uses this technique. For example, here's a more recent episode. If we look at the episode Sports and we look at all of the different crowd shots, we can see that they still loop animations, but at least at this point, there's a ton of different variety with the different incidentals. Now, as expected, SpongeBob completely fails once it's his turn. The dude can't lift the anchor and his fake arms end up exploding, which results in everybody realizing that SpongeBob was just capping and lying the entire time. The dude literally ordered muscles in the mail. Talk about LARPing. See, guys, I'm a millennial, but I learned that word the other day. I know what LARPing means now. Am I cool, guys? Am I cool? To all my Gen Z viewers, am I cool now?
No.
But yeah, weirdly enough, it seems that SpongeBob might not have been the only one cheating during this scene, as if we watch Sandy during the competition, she doesn't actually throw her anchor like everyone else. She like throws it upward and then kicks it when it comes back down. Now, in a real competition, this move would probably get her disqualified immediately because that is absolutely not like a normal throw, but in the episode, she actually gets the highest score and wins anyways. But yeah, it's easy to miss, but Sandy technically cheats in this episode as well. Moving on though, this competition also gives us a small but interesting piece of incidental character lore. The character Incidental 32 had already appeared before this episode in Ripped Pants, but at this point he was just another beach background character. However, in Muscle Bob Buff Pants, the announcer actually gives him a name when he competes.
First up, Dom the Whale.
200 yards!
Wow, let's see an instant replay.
It's very easy to miss because it's just a quick announcement during the contest, but now you know that this is the episode where Don the Whale first got an actual name. But also though, the same thing happens with Sandy. Before this episode, we didn't actually know Sandy's last name. We only know that her name was Sandy and she was a squirrel. But when the announcer also calls her up to compete, he refers to her as Sandy Cheeks, thus giving us the first reveal of her full name. So yeah, this episode actually quietly adds a ton of little bits of lore to the series. It's just very easy to miss because I mean, who pays attention to this stuff? But now you know, if you're ever with a group of friends, you can be like, just so you know, Sandy got her last name for the very first time in SpongeBob Buff Pants.
Loser.
Now I'm gonna move on from this episode soon, but I've got a couple of more things. And the next one takes place during that same competition scene, as when Larry throws his anchor, the grunting noise sounds like it's performed by a completely different voice actor. Here, let's take a listen to Larry's regular voice.
Dude, you're ripped.
And now let's take a listen to the noise he makes when he throws the anchor in this episode.
Larry the Lobster.
Yeah, it sounds completely different, and it actually sounds very familiar. And that's because it was likely performed by the voice actor of Patrick, Bill F. I mean, I'm gonna play the clip again, and you'll hear it like that 100% sounds like Patrick, right?
SpongeBob, is that you?
Now, I don't know why this happened, but it was most likely a situation where like Larry's voice actor did not record that line, but Patrick's voice actor was in the studio, so they just had him do it, which also makes sense considering the fact that like Patrick is a main character, so he'd probably be in the studio all the time, the voice actor, whereas Larry was more of like a side or background character in season 1. He only appears a few times, so I doubt that his voice actor was in the studio as often as Bill, Patrick's voice actor. So they just had Patrick's voice actor do the line. I'm over explaining this, but it tripped me out when I heard it, and now you guys know. But we're not done with this episode yet, as in the end, the episode ends back at Sandy's house, where she gives SpongeBob a new workout routine, where he clicks through TV channels with a remote to strengthen his fingers and arms. Now, I don't know if this actually works, because SpongeBob's arm literally falls off during the scene, but more importantly, this scene actually gave us our first real look at Sandy's living room inside of her treehouse. Before this, we had seen like the inside of her tree dome before, and we also got one very quick bedroom shot in Sandy's rocket. I'm showing it on screen right here. But this one scene at the ending of SpongeBob Buff Pants is the first time that we got to see a more detailed interior living space inside of the treehouse itself. And it's funny because it only appears for like a few seconds, but the background painting is actually like really detailed. And here's another random but fun fact about the scene. There's even rough artwork showing what the location looked like before it was fully colored and finished. I got this from the SpongeBob wiki, so shout out to them. Okay, and here's one last final fact about this episode before we move on to another one. It's very random, but some of the shots of Perch Perkins doing commentary during the anchor throwing competition appear in the 2008 movie Cloverfield. They can be seen playing on TVs inside an electronics store. You have to like pause to actually see it, but here you go, it's right here. And you know, this makes me wonder, does Nickelodeon need to give permission to do something like this, right? Given the context of the scene, I don't know if they got permission. Like, it happened so quickly. Did they pay Nickelodeon money to have a SpongeBob episode appearing on this TV? I actually just Google searched it, and no, they don't have to pay for something like this. It's because of the context of the scene. But yeah, that's this episode, guys. There was a ton of cool stuff, and let's head over to another one. Squidward the Unfriendly Ghost doesn't have like a crazy amount of behind the scene details or Easter eggs, but there are still a few cool things worth pointing out. Now, the main plot is all about SpongeBob and Patrick thinking they accidentally killed Squidward after melting a wax sculpture he made of himself.
We're almost there. We can do this.
It's working.
This is working. This is working. This is working. Patrick, this isn't working.
After this, the real Squidward walks out covered in powder. And because they think that they just literally killed him, they start to think that the real Squidward is the ghost of the Squidward they killed, and they immediately panic. From there, Squidward realizes what's going on and takes full advantage of it, which makes sense because, you know, it's Squidward we're talking about here.
Here?
No, too wet. Keep going. Keep going.
Here?
Too loose, la track.
He forces SpongeBob and Patrick to do whatever his ghost commands, with them under the impression that if they don't, they'll be haunted for the rest of their lives. This whole setup happens pretty early in the episode, And luckily, a lot of early artwork and storyboard material from these scenes has surfaced over the years, and I've got my hands on all of it thanks to the SpongeBob wiki. For one, there's an early sketch of SpongeBob and Patrick reacting after they think they melted Squidward, and a shot of the sculpture's face with Patrick's butt imprint in it. And there's even a storyboard panel of SpongeBob and Patrick begging Squidward's ghost not to punish them. Which, as you've seen, I've lined up all of these different, pieces of art with the final scenes from the episode. And yeah, it's really cool to see how much of the original staging made it into the final episode, right? Heck, the art team even made model sheets for the fake wax Squidward sculpture itself, which is kind of insane when you remember that it only exists to get melted down. It's like in the episode for like maybe 30 seconds. But that's one thing I've really noticed while covering season 1. The production team put a lot of effort even into the smallest one-off props and character designs. Which I will say, maybe that was normal for cartoons from this era, but it still shows how much care went into the final product. Those model sheets also reveal a pretty neat production detail. As you can see right here, during development, this episode had a different title. It was originally called Squidward's House of Wax. The writer of this episode, Sherm C, later confirmed online via Twitter that this title was partially a reference to the 1953 horror film House of Wax, which kind of makes like perfect sense when you know the plot. And just saying, I found that interaction with Sherm C on Twitter myself. I didn't get that from the wiki. But yeah, let me know in the comments what title you guys prefer. Like, if you think about it, Squidward's House of Wax actually explains the original joke of the episode even more clearly than the final title. But I mean, Squidward the unfriendly ghost is so iconic. And also, just another random bit of trivia for you guys, Squidward the unfriendly ghost was most likely a reference to Casper, like come on. Also, speaking of Squidward's house, I really want to highlight the interior of his home during these opening scenes, especially his art room. Squidward had already been established as an artist before this, mainly through these self-portraits we seen back in the episode Opposite Day, which is where, the art team really started to add this element to Squidward of him being an artist back in Opposite Day. But this episode pushes that idea even further, with his art room having way more personality in this episode. Back in Opposite Day, all we had were the typical self-portraits of Squidward, copied and pasted throughout his house as you can see here. But in this episode, we get a couple of really unique paintings that look different from anything we had seen in his house up to this point. Like, just look at these two paintings, they actually look really cool. And it kind of highlights that Squidward is actually a good artist. Squidward's so narcissistic that all of the art he makes is about himself, which makes it come across as lame. But if you actually look at these pieces, like if your friend painted this, you'd be like, yo, you're really good at art. Plus, I mean, at least Squidward didn't use AI to make these photos. On top of those two paintings though, there's also this strange blue art piece of his head. It's kind of weird, but it's cool. There's also this custom vase right here that Squidward presumably made. And more importantly, there's his iconic bonsai tree right here. That bonsai would actually become a reoccurring part of Squidward's collection, showing up again in later episodes like A Friendly Game, or even later episodes in the modern era, for example in The Clam Whisperer. Plus, also just saying, the whole plot of this episode is caused by a sculpture Squidward made himself. So the main point I'm making here is that at this point, the writers and art team were clearly leaning harder into Squidward being an artist. If you've watched all of my season 1 videos, you've gotten to see the evolution of Squidward's character. Like, when he first was in the show, he was just SpongeBob's rude, annoying neighbor. Well, I guess SpongeBob was actually the annoying one, but you get what I mean. But by this point, Squidward actually has a personality. He has a last name, which was also introduced in Opposite Day. And he has specific character traits that are exclusive to him. And just, yeah, I love this shit. Now, later in the episode, when SpongeBob and Patrick are cleaning Squidward's house and trying to serve his ghost, they come across a book, and this leads into another important detail, as this episode technically served as the debut of the Flying Dutchman. Well, kind of.
It's the origin of the Flying Dutchman. It says when he died, they used his body as a window display. Now he haunts the 7 seas because he was never put to rest.
As an air date order, this was the first time that viewers and fans like you or me ever saw the character. But he doesn't physically appear. We only see pictures of him in this book right here. And hey, the dude doesn't even have his iconic voice yet. Still though, this was the first time the character was ever shown on screen. But what's funny about this is that this wasn't originally meant to be his proper debut. It turns out that the Flying Dutchman was actually created for the Halloween special Scaredy Pants, which would air later on after this episode. And he actually shows up in that episode, scaring the crap out of SpongeBob and everybody else at the Krusty Krab. But because Scaredy Pants aired after this episode, Squidward the Unfriendly Ghost became his first appearance by technicality. I would have loved that, the Flying Dutchman appears in Scaredy Pants, but then he has a reappearance in this episode. I love that stuff. In modern SpongeBob, I think a lot of people have been spoiled with this because, as I've said a million times, characters like Bubble Bass and Lady Upturn, they pop up all the time now. But back in like season 1, 2, and 3, it wasn't like that. A lot of characters were one-offs. So I love when these one-off characters will make multiple appearances in a season. It builds up the world of SpongeBob. Okay, and one last quick detail before we move on to another season 1 episode, and that's that this episode actually randomly showed up outside of SpongeBob years later, as the scene where SpongeBob and Patrick cling onto each other in fear was briefly featured in the 2019 film Pet Sematary. The character Ellie can be seen watching the episode while looking around the house suspiciously. It's a pretty random cameo, but it's cool that even years later, like almost 20 years later, this episode is still being referenced. Sandy's Rocket is a really interesting season 1 episode because on the surface, it's mostly remembered as a SpongeBob and Patrick story, right? I mean, the main plot is about them sneaking into Sandy's rocket, accidentally launching themselves, and then kidnapping everyone around Bikini Bottom like they're psychos since they think they're aliens. But before the episode focuses so much on SpongeBob and Patrick, there was a very important moment earlier in this episode, as it gave Sandy a really important piece of characterization. In this episode, Sandy builds a fully functional rocket ship and plans to use it for space research, which is a pretty big detail as this was the first episode that really showed Sandy's interest in science.
This isn't for fun. See this? This is science. I don't have time for fun and games, and I don't have time for stowaways.
Later in the series, especially after the first 2004 SpongeBob movie, Sandy being a scientist or really smart would become one of her main characteristic traits, with her being shown building machines and inventing all kinds of crazy technology. But Sandy's rocket is actually the earliest example of that side of her character. Before this, Sandy was mostly defined by being this tough Texan character who was really freaking good at karate.
Well, SpongeBob, take a gander at this.
But this episode added another layer to her, and honestly set up one of her most important traits as a character in my opinion. I'm gonna move on to other Easter eggs, don't worry, and other facts, but I mean, really think about it. There are so many SpongeBob episodes that are very dependent on this trait of Sandy. Moving on though, SpongeBob and Patrick end up messing with Sandy's rocket and launch it into space. And during the rocket's takeoff, there's a quick little gag where Patrick is seen playing a video game on one of the screens inside the rocket. He's having a good old time.
This is Sandy's big rocket, not some kind of fun house.
Now, it's a very small moment, but if you listen closely, the sound effects that play during the scene are extremely similar to the Game Boy version of Tetris. For example, take a listen for yourself.
This is Sandy's big rocket, not some kind of fun house.
This is a really cool detail, and it's interesting as at this time when this episode was in production in the very late 90s, Tetris was like a massive game at the time. I'm pretty sure it was actually like the best-selling Game Boy game of all time at the time. And honestly, I wouldn't be surprised if some of the people who were like developing and producing this episode were playing Tetris on the Game Boy at the time when making the episode. But who knows, that's just a theory. But this episode kept on sneaking in references as it went on. For example, moments after takeoff, there's a really fun scene where SpongeBob and Patrick become weightless due to gravity. And there's actually an Easter egg here, so let's roll the clip and let's see if you guys can spot it.
Hey, we stopped falling!
Look, we're in space now!
There's a book that floats by with 2001 written on its cover, this book right here. And if you're a younger dude, you probably won't get it, but this is actually a reference to the 1968 film 2001: A Space Odyssey. Honestly, one of the most famous science fiction movies ever made. It's a very fitting reference considering this entire episode is about space and going to space, so yeah, it was a fun reference. But after the rocket returns to Bikini Bottom, the episode shifts a little bit. SpongeBob and Patrick believe that they have landed on the moon, even though they are actually right back where they started, in Bikini Bottom.
It sure looks a lot like home.
Can't you see this is all a trick? The aliens are projecting our memories onto the environment. You're trying to confuse us, Patrick.
I love you, SpongeBob and Patrick, but you guys are bozo sometimes. Like, could you not tell that you were in Bikini Bottom? Like, you can literally see your house in some shots, SpongeBob. But because of their mix-up, they start assuming that because they're on the moon, that everybody they're seeing in town is actually an alien pretending to be a normal Bikini Bottom resident. So this leads to them capturing a bunch of familiar-looking fish. And this is where a pretty underrated character detail comes in. Now, who remembers the character Flats the Flounder?
Hi, SpongeBob. I'm gonna kick your butt.
A lot of people mistakenly think that this character first appeared back in the episode The Bully, since that is his most famous episode, and it's very nostalgic for a lot of fans.
Dad, what are you doing?
Nothing, son.
What did I tell you about talking to strangers?
Now he's gonna kick my butt.
Well, it turns out that Flats the Flounder's actual first appearance was in Sandy's Rocket, something that I completely missed as a kid. And it's because it's during a very quick shot, as he shows up during the sequence where SpongeBob and Patrick do a montage of rounding up different Bikini Bottomites and trapping them. So yeah, a fun fact here that Flats the Flounder actually debuted in this episode. And again, it's something that I feel like a lot of fans don't realize. Moving on though, to capture everyone, SpongeBob and Patrick use these net guns right here. And you'd think that they'd just stay in this episode, but they actually were featured outside of the actual TV show. And here's why. When developers make SpongeBob video games or any licensed video game, they're usually given art assets and reference material from the show so that the games can pull from actual episodes. And a fun example of this is that the net guns from this episode, Sandy's Rocket, were later used in two different SpongeBob video games, Legend of the Lost Spatula and Operation Krabby Patty. And the reason this is interesting is that this is a very specific reference. I mean, the net guns are not some like reoccurring SpongeBob item or object. They're like literally only tied to this episode, so seeing them represented in other forms of SpongeBob media is cool and it's world building. You know what I mean? If we see something in one episode, it could appear in another form of SpongeBob media. For example, those boots that Sandy made in the episode Stuck on the Roof, we talked about it before, but those were a random item exclusive to that episode, but they were eventually used in a video game, so cool stuff. Let's get back to the plot though, as just before SpongeBob and Patrick capture Squidward, they analyze him because they think he is an alien. But more importantly, this scene and section of the episode includes a few clear nods to the 1979 film Alien. The most obvious one happens when Squidward tentacles attaches to Patrick's helmet.
Pardon my French, but get this thing off me!
For those of you who don't know, this is actually a direct reference to the facehuggers who were featured in the Alien franchise. Now, this joke works because Squidward is not doing anything alien at all. He's just being typical old Squidward. And I mean, what better episode to include a reference to the Alien movies than an episode where SpongeBob and Patrick think that everybody are literally aliens? Which again, they are so dumb for falling for this. I'd expect this from Patrick, but not from SpongeBob. There's also another reference to the Alien films in this scene, and it has to do with Squidward's water bottle, as the way that SpongeBob's hands appear under the light inside the bottle looks really similar to how the eggs appeared in the Alien movies. Also though, respect to the writers and the art team for including like a reference to a dark sci-fi horror movie within a kid show. But yeah, there's another reference in this episode, so let's keep it moving, guys. There's a lot of them in this one episode. Now, as we mentioned, SpongeBob and Patrick briefly go to space during the first half of this episode, but by the end of the episode, SpongeBob goes to space again. And there's this really cool shot where SpongeBob looks out of the window towards the moon, and we get this view of Earth. Now, you need to be a total nerd to even catch something like this, and to be honest with you, I didn't even notice it. I had to use like Wikipedia to learn. But this shot from the episode looks almost identical to the famous Earthrise photograph. This photo was taken by astronaut William Anders on December 24th, 1968, during the Apollo 8 mission, where they went to the moon. And honestly, it's become one of the most iconic iconic images ever captured from space, so it makes sense that they'd reference it in this episode. As you just seen, there are a ton of really cool references in this episode, but let's head over to another episode with even crazier Easter eggs, facts, and trivia. The episode Tea at the Tree Dome is one of the most important early SpongeBob episodes, but not because it's packed with a ton of Easter eggs or trivia. I mean, compared to a lot of other season 1 episodes, there really isn't a lot of interesting production or trivia to point out. Still though, the episode has a few really interesting details, and the first one comes from its title card. Now, in the final version that aired, the title card that was used looks like this. It uses blue text over this like acorn themed background, which really fit the episode perfectly since the story is centered around Sandy Cheeks and her tree dome. However, it turns out this was not the original title card made for the episode. Eventually, the SpongeBob community discovered the original title card via a video game, the SpongeBob Super Sponge video game, which actually contained a bunch of old production assets, which is like crazy that fans got their hands on this. And if we do a side-by-side, we can see the differences between the original and the final version. That by itself is already a cool piece of SpongeBob history, but the story of this title card gets even more surprising, as the scrapped version was not just forgotten forever. It was later remade in 16:9, and like 26 years later, it was used for the season 15 episode A Fish Called Sandy. I mean, talk about a full circle moment, right? And honestly, I'm surprised that the art team even remembered this title card, which makes me wonder, maybe the art team makes a ton of them in advance, but who knows? Another cool fact about this episode though revolves around the debut of Sandy Cheeks. And don't worry, it isn't the actual debut, that isn't the fact here, but it's more regarding her relationship with SpongeBob in season 1. Steven Hillenburg once stated in a SpongeBob DVD special featurette that he created Sandy as a strong female character who could be SpongeBob's friend, but never a love interest. That detail matters because it explains why SpongeBob and Sandy's relationship has usually stayed as a friendship throughout the series.
For Sandy Cheeks, I was looking for a strong female character that could be friends with SpongeBob but not a love interest. They really bang around and do karate together, kind of like stunt buddies. And so that gets him into trouble, creates some conflict in the way they challenge each other.
They hang out, they care about each other, they love doing karate together, and they're like homies. But the show does not treat them like a romantic pair. In later episodes, there have been small moments of this, but for the most part, they're just buddies. However, this was not the only direction people considered early on. A fun fact is that Hillenburg was apparently pressured by some of his peers and coworkers to add a hint of romance between SpongeBob and Sandy. This actually almost happened around the time they were preparing to pitch the show. And if you think about it, if the show had leaned into that more, Sandy and SpongeBob's dynamic could have been completely different. But fortunately, Steven Hillenburg eventually decided against it. Instead of turning Sandy into just being SpongeBob's love interest, the show let her stand out as her own character. And I mean, this was a really good decision, as Sandy would go on to be a very popular character on her own, even getting her own movie. Let's keep it moving though. As a lot of you already know, Tea at the Tree Dome is clearly supposed to be SpongeBob and Sandy's first meeting in the original series.
So, what do y'all call yourself? I'm SpongeBob!
SpongeBob very clearly does not know who Sandy is in this episode, and Sandy very clearly has no idea who SpongeBob is as well. And the episode's entire plot is built around them finally getting to know each other and be introduced to one another. But years later, the spin-off Camp Coral created a pretty major continuity issue by showing SpongeBob and Sandy meeting as children at summer camp, which obviously clashes with Tea at the Tree Dome, because if they already met when they were younger in the prequel show, then this episode of them meeting in the actual regular show cannot actually happen, right? And don't worry, just saying, I'm not about to ramble on about what you guys think I'm about to ramble on about. I've talked about this topic a couple of times before, but I actually found a new Easter egg relating to this, as the franchise eventually found another way to acknowledge the inconsistency. As you guys know, there's an episode in Camp Coral where at the end, prequel Sandy and regular main series Sandy have a conversation and they kind of fix the whole mess up. But also in the Camp Coral series finale, the episode End of Summer Days, there's another Easter egg here, as when everybody's heading home from camp, thus ending the prequel and setting things up for the original SpongeBob series, there's a moment where Sandy says the following.
Hey Sandy, wanna sit with us on the bus?
Thanks for the invite, SpongeBob. But future Sandy says I should take the express train back home. For the good of the timeline. See you for tea at the Tree Dome!
What did any of that mean?
As you just heard, Sandy explained that she cannot board the bus due to her needing to preserve the timeline. And then she follows up by saying, "See you for tea at the tree dome." If you couldn't already tell, this line is a direct reference to this episode. And it was basically the show's way of pointing back to Sandy's original introduction. I really like this one just because it was the writers being conscious of SpongeBob canon and lore, which already sounds kind of ridiculous, right? Like SpongeBob canon, but it is a thing. And if you're gonna do a show with multiple spin-offs and multiple seasons, there does need to be a bit of a canon to follow here. One more thing though, as the last major thing I want to mention about this episode is one of its most memorable scenes. When SpongeBob enters Sandy's tree dome, he starts drying out because he is a sea creature and the tree dome is filled with air.
You know, you're the first sea critter to ever visit.
I can't imagine why.
Can I get you anything?
Water would be nice.
Our boy can barely breathe, but instead of admitting something is wrong, he keeps trying to act normal because he wants to impress Sandy. His body becomes shriveled, and the whole scene is honestly one of the most iconic jokes from this episode.
I don't need it. I don't need it. I definitely don't need it.
Well, that dehydrated version of SpongeBob, and that entire scene in general, was featured in the SpongeBob Battle for Bikini Bottom video game, specifically the console version, not the crappy GBA version. That's like a completely different game despite having the exact same title. But yeah, the developers did a very good job referencing this episode in the video game, as SpongeBob's dried out appearance and dry voice are both used whenever he enters Sandy's tree dome in the game.
Sandy, your tree dome is leaking.
Them there robots busted up the glass, SpongeBob. I got a treehouse chock full of robots and it's all your fault, so get in there and clean up your mess.
One of the classic episodes from early SpongeBob, titled Clams, centers on Mr. Krabs celebrating a major milestone, that being him earning his millionth dollar.
What's wrong with Mr. Krabs?
Do you know what this is? You have just given me my $1 million.
What do I win?
Nothing! Everybody get out! You're spoiling me moments!
Our favorite Grady Crab is absolutely freaking stoked about this, as you can imagine. And to celebrate, Mr. Krabs drags SpongeBob and Squidward on a fishing trip instead of the fancy vacation that they were expecting. I mean, this is Mr. Krabs we're talking about here, the cheapest cartoon character in the history of cartoon characters. Can any of you even name another cartoon character that is as greedy as Eugene Krabs over here? Anyways though, trouble strikes when a giant clam, known as Old Blue Lip, swallows that shiny millionth dollar, which sends Mr. Krabs into like a tweaking frenzy. Like, our boy is just flipping out in this episode. And this brings us into our first reference, as the rest of this episode parodies the movie Jaws. But we'll get into the Jaws thing in a moment. For now, let's talk about some really interesting lore about this episode, as there was an entire scene that got cut and deleted. As I mentioned, the episode begins with Mr. Krabs being very excited about his new millionth dollar. But originally, the writers planned an extra dark comedic beat right after that celebration, one that never made it onto television. In the Clam storyboard, which was included as a bonus on one of the SpongeBob DVDs, Mr. Krabs was going to pick up the Krusty Krab phone and call his parents to boast about his new accomplishment. This would lead to a punchline, if you even want to call it that, where it would cut to a shot of two tombstones, revealing that Mr. Krabs' parents are long dead.
No! This is my $1 million earned!
Every crowd's goal in life is to make $1 million, and now I got mine! Mom, Dad, I finally done it! I've made me millionth dollar! That's great, son!
This morbid joke went as far as having art assets like made for it for the episode. For example, we can see painted background art made for the gravestones and for the payphone that was supposed to be inside the Krusty Krab. But as I've mentioned, this scene was eventually cut during production. And why? There are two big reasons. First, it created a continuity error. Mr. Krabs' mother, Mama Krabs, or also known as Betsy Krabs, had already appeared alive in earlier episodes. For example, in the episode Sailor Mouth from season 2, where she scolded Mr. Krabs for his bad language. Here's the thing though, Betsy Krabs was also slated to appear in another season 3 episode titled Midlife Crustacean, so killing her off in Clams would conflict with those appearances. In terms of Mr. Krabs' father, we hadn't actually met the dude yet. He does eventually appear later on, but at this point we didn't really know much about it. Nonetheless, the storyboard team realized that they were about to orphan Mr. Krabs, so they wisely pulled the plug. But there's even another reason, as even by SpongeBob standards, the joke was honestly very, dark. It's basically just a joke about Mr. Krabs' parents being dead with no, actual payoff, which is funny that they were going to do it, but it would have felt somewhat out of place considering the lighthearted nature of this episode. Moving on though, once the episode shifts to the fishing trip portion of the episode, Clams goes full on Jaws. It's like a love letter to the movie, with almost every aspect of the famous 1975 shark thriller being spoofed. In fact, Clams was originally going to wear its inspiration on its sleeve, as the working title for the episode was originally Sponge Jaws. Early production materials and model sheets still refer to it by that name, as you can see right here. So this isn't just some sort of long-time rumor. Nickelodeon eventually changed the title to the less on-the-nose Clams, likely to avoid any legal issues or too obvious allusions to Jaws. But let's dive into some of these references. For example, the plot and characters. Just like in Jaws, where three men, Quint, Brody, and Hooper, head out on a boat to hunt a great white shark, here we have Mr. Krabs, SpongeBob, and Squidward on a boat hunting a giant clam. Mr. Krabs is the Quint of the story, the obsessed sea captain driven to madness by the creature, while SpongeBob takes on the role of Chief Brody, and Squidward takes on the role of Matt Hooper. And there's other references. For example, the boat they use is called the SS Cheapskate, a direct reference to the SS Orca from Jaws. And there's also the musical cues, as the music in this episode is very similar to John Williams' score for Jaws. Even the episode's title card art and lettering evoke the style of Jaws posters from back in the day. And there's even scenes that are very similar to scenes from Jaws. For example, when Mr. Krabs uses SpongeBob and Squidward as bait to lure in the monster clam, as this mirrors a scene from Jaws, of course, where the character Hooper is also used as bait to lure in a shark. But Jaws wasn't the only sea tale echoed in Clams. The episode also has some cool references to the classic novel Moby Dick. In fact, just like Jaws, one of the early working titles for Clams was Moby Dollar, which, I mean, come on, an obvious reference to Moby Dick. Not only that, but there's also a gag in the episode that directly references the book. And honestly, it's something that went completely over my head as a little kid. But later on in the episode, when Mr. Krabs is really freaking out about the dollar, he throws all of SpongeBob and Squidward's food off of the boat. They're literally stranded on this boat, so they're just screwed now, and all that's left is one sandwich.
Then I guess I have no choice but to offer a reward.
You're kidding.
It's this sandwich.
A sandwich? You expect me to break my back over a sandwich?
This is actually a reference to Moby Dick, as in that book, the captain nails a gold coin to the ship as a reward for whoever spots Moby Dick first. Now, one other thing I want to talk about in regards to this episode that's very interesting is that this episode was actually Stephen Hillenburg recycling some of his older work, as Clams shares a plot and even a specific joke with an episode of Rocko's Modern Life, another cartoon that SpongeBob's creator Stephen Hillenburg worked on in the 1990s. The episode in question is Fish in Chumps from 1995, where Rocko and his friends go on a fishing trip and encounter a massive vengeful fish. If this sounds familiar, it's because, I mean, come on, it's very similar to Clams and is very similar to Jaws as well. It seems that Hillenburg essentially took the fun framework from that Rocko episode and refashioned it for SpongeBob and a clam. We know this because this episode, Clams, was made by both Stephen Hillenburg and written by Mark O'Hare. And if we go back to Fish and Chumps, that episode was also made by Stephen Hillenburg and written by the same writer, Mark O'Hare. So I imagine that these two are massive fans of Jaws. Both episodes even feature a very similar gag. In Clams, while the Krusty crew are going fishing, SpongeBob accidentally uses Mr. Krabs' millionth dollar as bait, literally casting it into the ocean. As this happens, music very similar to the movie Jaws starts to play. Very suspenseful, dramatic music. Mr. Krabs realizes this and breaks the fourth wall, with him acknowledging the music and telling it to stop.
Stop playing that music! Stop it, please!
Well, this exact same gag happened back in that Rocko's Modern Life episode. That same style of music starts playing just as one of the characters is in trouble. And because of this, we get the exact same gag, with the character Filbert acknowledging the music and stealing this dude's instrument right here.
Do something quick!
So yeah, lots of cool details when it comes to this episode. It's a classic episode and it's a banger. Let me know in the comments how you guys felt about this clams section. Just because this one has no Easter eggs, it's more just behind the scenes and just facts about this episode. So let me know if you guys actually enjoyed that. Either way though, let's head over to another episode. The episode Plankton is one of the most important season 1 episodes because it introduces two characters who would eventually become a massive part of SpongeBob history, them being Sheldon J. Plankton and of course his computer wife Karen. Now before this episode Plankton, the Krusty Krab didn't really have a main villain. Well, that changed in this episode. And though the character starts off tiny, both literally and in terms of his early role within the show, this episode sets up the entire Chum Bucket versus Krusty Krab dynamic. But a funny detail about Plankton's creation is that Doug Lawrence, the voice actor who ended up playing him, originally wanted to use that now iconic Plankton voice for SpongeBob instead.
I know you got it. I know you got the secret formula on you right now. So hand it over. Hand it over.
When he was first brought in for voices, he auditioned for SpongeBob and specifically used the Plankton voice during his pitch, which is just crazy to imagine. Imagine SpongeBob with Plankton's voice.
I came in auditioning for that, and I did the Plankton's voice for the SpongeBob character. Because it was a voice that I was in, this deep voice that I used to do that used to make Tom laugh. And I never really had him as a voice, I just did him sometimes in the Rocco records. And Tom Kenny would always laugh when I would do that.
Like I said, it's crazy to even imagine like a world where SpongeBob uses Plankton's voice. But yeah, this didn't end up happening, as most of you know. After Stephen Hillenburg heard Doug Lawrence's pitch tape, he immediately felt that the voice was actually more suited for Plankton. But Nickelodeon themselves apparently were not fully convinced at first, with Doug stating on many occasions that Stephen Hillenburg really had to push for him and prove that he was right for the role, which again is crazy because this dude just nails Plankton's voice. So imagine if somebody else voiced the character.
So we figured this is, it should be a slam dunk. Instead it was, we're still, we saw you want to hire Doug, but Steve would go, can you write something and record it and send it to New York? I kept writing things at my desk.
That's Plankton.
This fast, writing down stuff for me to say, printing it out, running downstairs, recording it, and they're sending it to New York, and I did that a few times. And they said, yeah, it's fine. Yeah, I don't know. We're still not sure. We're still on the fence here about Doug. We still think it'd be best to get a famous person playing this.
In hindsight, Hillenburg's instinct was obviously right. I mean, Doug's voice gives Plankton this perfect mix of anger and honestly ego. Like the voice sounds like your typical ego maniac character, which is exactly what the Plankton character needed. But something even more interesting about Plankton in this episode itself is that even after Plankton found the right voice, the character was still not guaranteed to become a major or main character that's a part of the main SpongeBob cast. As a matter of fact, Stephen Hillenburg only wanted to use Plankton as a one-off, or at most a very occasional character. And this was due to the concern that Plankton's stories could become repetitive and predictable. I mean, if every single SpongeBob episode was just him trying to steal the Krabby Patty secret formula, it would get pretty old very fast. So because of that, during season 1, Hillenburg actually demoted Plankton from a main character to more of a minor role. But Doug Lawrence had a big hand in changing that. And this was due to the fact that Lawrence was not just Plankton's voice actor, he was also a writer on the show, and he really liked the character. In a 2015 newspaper interview, he explained that Plankton was only supposed to appear in 1 or 2 episodes. But because he was a writer and enjoyed the character so much, he started coming up with more ideas for him. And this eventually proved to Stephen Hillenburg that Plankton could maybe work more than just a one-time gag. Here's a random fact for you guys, but if you go to the credits of the first SpongeBob movie, the 2004 one, this was actually the first time that the main cast cast was actually highlighted in the credits. And if we look, this was also the first time that Plankton and Karen were considered as main characters. But it's not all about Plankton. We also gotta talk about Karen, as Plankton would not nearly be as entertaining without her. In this first episode, giving her her first appearance, Karen is not really the character that fans know today. She's introduced as Plankton's waterproof computer system, and at this point, she's not even treated as his wife yet. And this is because originally, Karen was planned to be more like a computer component that could be attached to Plankton's inventions. And that's actually how she functions in this episode. For example, when Plankton controls SpongeBob and tries to scan the ingredients of the Krabby Patty, Karen is basically the part of the machine doing the scanning, as you can see in this clip right here.
Seaweed, 50% sea, 50% weed.
Like I said, it's a very different Karen. She isn't arguing with Plankton, and honestly, she's closer to like a text-to-speech program than an actual character. But as we all know, this would be refined over the years. Eventually, Karen becomes Plankton's wife, and honestly, the smarter half of most of his plans. She isn't just a computer, but she's now also his nagging wife who feeds him holographic meatloaf and also assists in all of his nefarious plans. And this was all thanks to Doug Lawrence. As once Lawrence decided that Plankton and Karen should basically be an inseparable duo, Karen's role started evolving to what I was just talking about, her being Plankton's wife. But I am kind of rambling here because none of that is really present in this episode Plankton, at least not yet. But it's cool to see this early version of the character before she evolved into what we know today. And also, looking back at this early version kind of makes it easier to understand why Steven Hillenburg may have been worried that Plankton's stories would become repetitive, considering that the actual dynamic between Plankton and Karen was not even figured out yet. But yeah, let's move on from this because I've spent a lot of time on the origins of Plankton and Karen here, but this episode itself also has a bunch of trivia and weird details that I'd like to point out. And one of them happens right at the start, when SpongeBob and Mr. Krabs laugh together at the Krusty Krab, as SpongeBob's laugh here sounds like a variant of the iconic laugh that we all know. But at the same time, it's not really the same. Here, take a listen. As you heard, it has a slightly different pitch in delivery, almost as if the series was still experimenting on what SpongeBob's laugh should actually sound like. Which makes sense considering, SpongeBob's laugh would become one of the most recognizable sounds in like the entire cartoon universe, but not this version of it. This version of it just sounds weird. I'm gonna play the clip again and just listen to this.
Enough, lad, it wasn't that funny. Get back to work!
Now, what makes this one even more interesting is that this exact alternate laugh appears as an unused sound file in the game Revenge of the Flying Dutchman. The more familiar laugh, the iconic one that we all know, did make it into the game, which makes it seem like this version was consciously dropped and just scrapped at one point. But also, there's another small one-off design choice later in the episode when SpongeBob goes to sleep. As if we look at his mattress, it actually has flower prints on it now. It's not a big deal, but this is kind of unusual because SpongeBob's mattress has never had these flower prints before this episode. Like, here's a shot of it before this episode, and even after it, it's just never happened again. Which, don't get it twisted, yes, SpongeBob's blanket is the thing that usually has a flower pattern, but not the actual mattress. So this was most likely either a small art team mistake or another case of the production team still experimenting with SpongeBob's room design. Which, as you've seen if you've been watching my videos, season 1 has quite a few moments like this, where a background detail does not fully match up with what would later become the standard in the series. They're not a big deal, but I'm just a nerd and love catching this stuff. But yeah, while SpongeBob's bedroom has that odd mattress detail, Plankton also gives us a couple of important location debuts that actually stayed very consistent over the years. For example, this is the first episode to ever show SpongeBob's kitchen and Squidward's bedroom, both locations that would appear again later on multiple times. And to give the art team credit, they actually stay pretty close to how they look here, which is interesting because a lot of early season 1 locations have small changes before the art team fully locked them in. But these two spaces in particular were already pretty solid from their first appearance. Moving on though, like a lot of classic season 1 episodes, Plankton has also been referenced years later in newer SpongeBob episodes. For example, in season 16, Patrick's grandfather, Grandpat, quickly travels back to this episode during the time travel special, SpongeBob and Patrick's Timeline Twist Up, which is actually pretty common, again again, if you've been watching all of my season 1 content, this episode from season 16 comes up a lot because there's a lot of Easter eggs in it to season 1. But yeah, it just shows how important and iconic this episode actually is. But we're not done yet. I still got some more interesting trivia about this one, as the episode has even appeared outside of the SpongeBob cartoon itself. Believe it or not, in a Big Bang Theory episode, the character Sheldon is seen watching this exact episode, Plankton, on his phone. It's specifically the scene where SpongeBob is being controlled by Plankton and breaks through this wall in Squidward's house. So talk about a random cameo, but also it's kind of really funny if you think about it that a character named Sheldon is watching an episode about Sheldon Plankton. Also though, a very quick clip from this episode was also used in a 2010 Chia Pet commercial.
Chia Pets, the pottery that grows. And now there's the Chia Gnome. Chia SpongeBob.
Now, one last random detail I want to talk about is small enough that most people would never even notice it, but it's still kind of interesting. And this one I'm gonna give complete credit to the SpongeBob wiki for. A lot of these other ones I had to do research on my own to confirm it all and add to it, but this one detail is straight from the wiki, and shout out to the SpongeBob Wikipedia or Spongepedia admins for finding this because it's crazy. But in this episode Plankton, the sesame seeds on the Krabby Patty buns are colored white, as you can see here. But this is a weird inconsistency in season 1, as in most season 1 episodes and even some early season 2 episodes, the sesame seeds are usually black. If we head over to the episode Help Wanted, we can see that those seeds are clearly black right here. But in this episode, they randomly appear as white, so I'm not sure why. This was most likely the art team not really landing on a permanent choice for the Krabby Patties, but it's also that they probably didn't expect any nerds like me or the SpongeBob fandom admins to find something like this. So I think we can all agree that we all need to touch grass. But hey, at least now you know this fun fact about the poppy seeds with Krabby Patties. Season 1's Ripped Pants is one of the earliest SpongeBob episodes that really shows how much bigger Bikini Bottom was becoming. This episode takes place at Goo Lagoon, which means that the episode needed a lot more background characters than the episodes set around SpongeBob's house or the Krusty Krab. And because of that, this episode actually served as the debut of a huge number of incidental characters. Now, we gotta remember that before this, we only knew of 2 or 3 incidental characters. We knew of Fred in Incidental 3, but this episode expanded on this concept a ton, introducing 50 plus new incidentals, including Incidental 2, Incidental number 4, and all of them all the way up until Incidental number 49. I'm showing a bunch of their different model sheets on screen right now, and just yeah, it might not seem like a big deal right now because we're in the modern day and we see these characters all the time, but this was the first time that the art team ever drew these characters for an episode. It's crazy to think that there was a time before these characters were even created, as a lot of these background fish are still used to this very day. Some of them even have names and have full-on episodes about them, which is pretty crazy because many of them were originally just created to fill out a beach crowd. Since Ripped Pants has so many public scenes, especially with SpongeBob embarrassing himself in front of everybody, the art team needed a much bigger cast of random Bikini Bottomites. For example, this scene right here.
You okay, SpongeBob?
I guess so. Except I ripped my pants!
The whole point of this episode is that SpongeBob rips his pants. He realizes that he gets attention for it, and then he just keeps on chasing that same reaction. And this only actually would work in this episode with an actual crowd of different characters watching him. Even with all of those new designs though, the art team still did not have enough unique background fish to avoid repeats completely, and thus there are a few moments where duplicated characters can be spotted. I mean, it's a very small detail that only a nerd like me would notice, but it is funny considering all of the new characters that were made just for this episode. Moving on though, the actual Ripped Pants gag from this episode ended up becoming one of the most iconic moments from early SpongeBob. And I can confirm this as a young millennial who grew up during the era when this episode aired on TV. When I'd go to school, this was a massive joke that people would reference.
You know what would go good with that?
No, what?
Ripped pants.
Well, this moment became memorable enough that Fisher-Price eventually made a toy based entirely on this one episode. The toy features SpongeBob with pants that can rip, of course, and the toy also plays the Ripped Pants song. It's interesting because this is a very specific thing to turn into merchandise, but I mean, it just shows how recognizable this episode actually became. And one interesting detail about this toy is that the song from the episode is not actually performed in the same way that it's performed in the actual episode. For one, in the actual episode, the song isn't sung by SpongeBob's voice actor Tom Kenny, and it's instead sung by Peter S. But in the toy version, Tom Kenny sings it for some reason. Nonetheless, it's an interesting piece of SpongeBob history. And here's the commercial. Let's give it a watch.
I need a tailored ripped pants SpongeBob. I'll take a banana split and some ripped pants.
Speaking of that Ripped Pants song, a fun fact is that the song itself is a very obvious reference to the Beach Boys, which I mean does make sense considering the episode does take place at Goo Lagoon. It's not a perfect match, but the song is very similar to the 1963 Beach Boys song Be True to Your School. And I'd say that this was most likely intentional. Like I already said, the episode is built around a beach setting with fish surfing in the background, so a Beach Boys style song was like kind of perfect for the episode. Ripped Pants is also the first episode for a few major SpongeBob staples, so let's dive into that, as this episode served as the debut of one of SpongeBob's most signature things, that being his signature laugh.
Did you order 20 cases of ripped pants?
You know, it's crazy to think that there were a couple of episodes before this where this laugh was not a part of the show yet.
But you haven't got it yet, have ye, bugs?
But yeah, this episode, Ripped Pants, marked the introduction of that famous laugh, which I mean, come on, would go on to be one of these sounds most associated with the entire series.
They love it.
But on top of that, this episode also served as the debut of the Goo Lagoon location, a spot that would go on to become one of the show's most common locations, appearing in a lot of later episodes whenever the writers needed a public outdoor setting. But back in Ripped Pants, the location was still brand new. The art team had to figure out what a beach in Bikini Bottom would even look like, and there's actually been concept art released for this episode showing how they developed the location. For example, this shot shows the waves in the water. Moving on, there's also a small continuity issue that comes from this episode, and it has to do with SpongeBob's surfing ability. Now, in Ripped Pants, SpongeBob is clearly shown surfing, as you can see in this shot right here. So based on this episode, SpongeBob can surf, or he at least knows what surfing is. Also, during this earlier era of the show, we see SpongeBob do shell surfing many times.
Stop naming moves after me.
Everybody's an idiot except for me.
Well, it's true.
So just to reiterate, the idea of SpongeBob being able to surf has already been in the show for a while. Like, my boy SpongeBob is like a sponge version of Tony Hawk. He can surf and he can skate. But years later, in SpongeBob SquarePants versus the Big One, the writers made a little bit of a mistake, and they treat SpongeBob as if he does not know how to surf. It's not a big deal, but it does create a pretty weird continuity error. And I mean, don't get me wrong, obviously SpongeBob continuity has never been perfect, and the show often cares way more about the joke or the gags than keeping every old detail consistent. But this one just kind of stood out, and I wanted to highlight it. It also shows a point that I make often, that it seems a lot of the later writers of the show, after Stephen Hillenburg left the show, were not as educated on SpongeBob lore. But as I've said many times, I mean, the idea of SpongeBob lore metaphor is already kind of ridiculous, right? But another reason that this episode is worth talking about is that Tom Kenny, SpongeBob's voice actor, has said that it's one of his favorite SpongeBob episodes. This is how you guys know that I go really hard, because for this we need to use a DVD special feature, the Backstage Pants DVD featurette, where Tom Kenny goes into detail about how he feels about the episode. Rather than me explaining the whole thing, here, take a listen for yourself. Here's the actual clip from the DVD.
I think one of my favorite episodes is Ripped Pants, the one where SpongeBob rips his pants by mistake and gets a laugh out of it, and then overplays his hand by doing it one too many times, and people get bored with it, and he realizes that jokes have a lifespan. And I think that's something that happened to me a lot as a kid, where you would accidentally hit on something that was really funny, and you would just do it over and over and over again. And when people stopped laughing, it was kind of like a slap in the face. It kind of hurt. And then you had to go out and find something else stupid to get attention and laughs from your fellow classmates.
Okay, I have one more thing to cover about this episode, and it's just to show how iconic Ripped Pants has really become, as the episode was even referenced 25 plus years later in SpongeBob and Patrick's Timeline Twist Up.
Well, you'll definitely remember when I ripped my pants.
You sure you remember it? Because that looks like my dad ripped your pants.
That's odd.
During this time travel special, Patrick's father travels back to this very episode, Ripped Pants, which is a pretty clear nostalgia pull, but this says a lot about the episode. As it's not just me, even Nickelodeon knows how iconic it actually is, even referencing it so many years later, so yeah.